Hello, Dominic, can you hear us? Hi, Donnie, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Wonderful. All right, just for the recording, we called to order at about quarter to 11 this morning. That's in the minutes. We've just gone through our closed session, so we're moving on to the public portion of the regular board meeting of the 26th of June, 2022. The first item on our agenda, or the third item on the official agenda, is item 3, disclosure of interest. Does any board member have a conflict of interest with any of the following business? Seeing none, we can move on. We have item 4.1, the approval of the agenda. We have a motion moved by myself, seconded by President Stoikos-Lettieri. Be it resolved that the agenda for the June 26th regular board meeting be approved as written. Does anyone have any additions, deletions, or corrections to the agenda? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor of approving the agenda? That is unanimous. Moving on to, just scroll back up to item 5.1. We have the motion to approve the regular board meeting minutes from May 16th, 2022. I emailed those all to you just before the meeting. Were there any additions, deletions, or corrections to those minutes from May 16th? Hearing none, we actually need to make a motion for this. So I will move to approve the regular board meeting minutes from May 16th, 2022. Do we have a seconder? President Stoikos-Lettieri, seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? That is unanimous as well. Moving on to item 5.2. The motion to approve the special board meeting minutes from May 24th of 2022. Again, I distributed those before the meeting. Are there any additions, deletions, or corrections? Hearing none, I will move to approve the special board meeting minutes from May 24th, 2022. Do we have a seconder? Seconded by Director Matthews.
I'm sorry, why is it purple?
Okay.
Okay.
Was it me?
Yeah.
We're good.
Okay. So we've got a motion moved by myself, seconded by Director Matthews, to approve the special board meeting minutes from May 24th, 2022. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? That is unanimous as well. Moving on to item 6, presentations and delegations. We have none on the agenda. Are there any presentations or delegations? Seeing none, we move on to item 7, director reports. Does any director have anything they would like to report? Hearing none, we can move on to item 8, staff reports. We don't have any on the agenda. Dustin or Sam, do you have anything you would like to bring to the attention of the board?
No, there's nothing that we haven't already discussed that would be new or beneficial at this stage, other than to say future board meetings, we will have a formal report that is a joint report from all the floor seating arrangement staff regarding what's happening specifically in their area. It'll speak to highlights. Some board meetings, they could be pages, some board meetings, they could be half a page. So depending on what's going on at the time, but from a staff perspective, supporting orientation, finishing up the Haven, finishing the collective agreement, working on the fees and services agreement with the university. Those are the priorities. Board training, as you know.
Perfect. Thank you very much. On to item 9, committee reports. Does any chair of any committee have anything to report?
The finance and governance subcommittee met last Wednesday. The DPF just presented update concerning different budgets. We voted on recommending to the board to support the DPF in looking at evaluating our contribution to the University's International Student Support Fund, as well as supporting the DPF in creating a proposal to look at the alternative to financial compensation for CUSA students.
Wonderful. And I believe that later in the agenda, we're actually referring that compensation for CUSA council to the Finance and Governance Committee, so perfect. Is there anything that requires board action at this meeting, or?
I don't believe so.
Maybe just the recommendation.
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Do we
Well,
need to?
we actually have, we voted on a list of recommendations. Do we want to refer the, or do we need to bring those recommendations to the board here?
Yeah, the committee has recommendations for the board. The board has to formally adopt the recommendations
Yes, okay,
for them to become sort of legal.
Do you want to, or do you want to?
Yeah, could you?
Okay, yes.
So if you can just email those to me and we can deal with that under item 9.
I will email those right now.
Human Resources Subcommittee met after yesterday. Well, we agreed unanimously that we had no items on the agenda, so we canceled the meeting. And the Agenda Subcommittee, you see the products of our labors, so nothing to report from either of those.
Who's on the agenda committee?
Myself, the vice chair, the president, and we actually have a vacancy. We have one director to appoint for the agenda committee. That is item 13.3.
Is that because of item 12, so 1?
Uh,
Vacancies?
13 sub 1 is because of 12 sub 1.
Yes.
Okay, I just got the recommendation.
I also don't know if it's relevant to disclose, but just want to share in case. I do sit on the finance committee, but unfortunately we had some confusion with the email addresses, so I wasn't made aware of the earlier meetings. So I'm abstaining from these recommendations. I did appoint, I'm so sorry, I'm blanking on Catherine's last name, but Director Catherine in my absence. And I will be present on the finance committee meetings going forward.
Perfect. And then, of course, yeah, you can vote on the recommendations here at the board. Yeah. Perfect.
Okay, I just,
You just sent them to me. And if you are sharing your screen,
yeah, I can.
if you could put them up for public consumption. I assume no one has any objections to bringing these recommendations forth. Going on sort of unanimous consent that we don't have any objections to what is essentially a late item. Did you send them?
Yes, but sorry, I couldn't.
No worries.
Sorry, I couldn't read for that one for some reason. So it might be a little.
Did you just bring up the document itself?
Doing both.
Right, so we have the following recommendations. Can I assume that you will motion Director Charles to the board to adopt these recommendations?
Yeah.
And I'll second them.
So we have a motion moved by Director Evans Charles, seconded by President Stoikos Lettieri, that the board adopt the following recommendations from the Finance and Governance Subcommittee. And I will read those recommendations now. Recommendation 1, supporting the Vice President, Finance Secretary, Treasurer in creating an alternative to financial compensation for CUSA counselors and providing the Vice President internal with the tools to make counsel fulfilling and empowering towards the betterment of the student experience. Recommendation 2, supporting the Vice President, Finance Secretary, Treasurer in changes being made to the budget lines to increase accountability, clarity, and transparency, including but not limited to recommendation 2.1, eliminating certain out-of-date budget lines such as the duplicating office decor and telephone lines to make the budget clear, transparent, and accountable for students. 2.2, adding and or changing sub-items to tighten up the budget and make clear where money is being allocated for both for future execs and students. 2.3, removing certain president budget lines such as promotion, advertising, and courier mail because they fall under the communications or vice president's internal budget lines. Recommendation 2.4, merging certain presidential budget line and president budget lines such as the meeting fund and strategic planning fund and professional development and conferences line to match other full-time staff budgets. Recommendation 2.5, removing campaign staff wages in line with other universities across Canada to encourage volunteerism and to promote creating fulfilling and meaningful experiences and opportunities for students to engage. Recommendation 2.6, adding and or changing budget lines for the Unified Support Center in consideration for plans to expand operations. Recommendation 2.7, repurposing the general manager budget into the executive director budget. And recommendation 2.8, changing the staff appreciation budget lines under the administrative budget and president's budget to better reflect how that money is being used. Recommendation 3, and I didn't get them here, so.
Oh, sorry. I'll just-
Recommendation 3, supporting the Vice President, Finance Secretary, Treasurer in his evaluation of our contribution to the university's International Student Support Fund and any subsequent budgetary changes to the Vice President Student Issues budget and the Vice President Community Engagement Issues. But Vice President Community Engagement budget and the RISE Center budget. All right, is there anything that the Finance and Governance Subcommittee would like to say about those recommendations? I think they probably speak for themselves.
Can we go back to it, please?
Oh, you want to go back to that one?
Yes.
Sure, sorry, I was gonna open up the.
Can you scroll up, please? Okay, so these are recommendations, correct?
Yes.
So they're not necessarily binding,
Um,
because some of the, like, for example, 2.1, like, my goal is to get rid of certain budget lines, but like, there
It
have,
says supporting.
yeah,
It
so
doesn't say forcing or, ordering.
okay.
yeah, so
that's okay.
essentially, we would adopt the recommendation to support you in changes being made, including but not limiting to, and the word certain and such as make it clear that those aren't binding, but they're merely examples.
Also, 2.2 has a typo. after
Oh, and
that,
make,
yeah.
yes, budget and make clear.
Other than that, yeah, I think they're pretty self-explanatory.
So it would be simply, ultimately, it would be the board's affirmation that we are going to support you in doing these 3 things. If there is no more discussion on the issue, the motion to adopt the recommendations presented by the Finance and Governance Subcommittee is moved by Director Huggins Charles, seconded by President Lettieri. I read them. I'm not going to read them again unless someone requires me to. If there's no more discussion on this issue, we can move into voting procedure. All those in favor of adopting the recommendations? I can no longer see Sarah. There we go.
I'm here, yeah.
There we go. That is unanimous. Fabulous. Moving on then to item 10, there is no introduction of bylaws or policies. Item 11, there is also no reconsideration of bylaws or policies. Item 12, announcements and correspondence. I received a letter from former director Sedan. They found that their summer was getting extremely busy and unfortunately resigned from the board. So that is their letter of resignation. It was effective immediately upon my receipt of the letter, so May 31st. As a result, we will be filling the board nominating committee in actually the next item. The council has already filled their seats for the board nominating committee, so our next steps will be to call a meeting of that committee to find a new individual to sit on the board. And then the board will be able to, as per the bylaws, the board will be able to select the successful candidate to take over from former director Zidane's seat. So that individual will sit on the board for the remainder of their 2-year term. Is there any discussion on this?
What's the timeline? When did the board expect to select the new director?
We're hoping as soon as possible. There's no official timeline set out in the bylaws, but my next step after filling the board nominating committee, I'm not entirely sure who the chair is of that committee, whether it's myself or whether it's another individual. I will be contacting them. Or at least contacting the entirety of the board nominating committee stating that we need to meet. And then that process will take ultimately as long as it takes to advertise the position, interview, and make the recommendation. So hopefully, I think the goal would be by September, within the next 2 months, to have a replacement. Ideally, even by our August meeting, we would hopefully be able to ratify a new director. Although, yeah, no promises on that. Sometimes these things take a lot of time, especially over the summer when students aren't necessarily checking the CUSA website for job posting. Actually, to Charlotte, Dominique, if you're there, it would be great if you might make mention that we are looking for another director. Are there any other?
Are we filling that committee today?
We will,
Sorry.
yes. 13.1, we will fill the board
Okay,
nominating.
and I guess we have to send that to council as well to fill.
They have already filled
filled
their,
it?
yes,
Okay.
they filled it at their last meeting.
Dominique, just to mention in your article that we're looking for a new director on our board of directors. Since in the summer it's difficult to attract the students' attention. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other announcements or correspondence that directors received? Seeing none, we can move on to item 13.1. I'll just scroll down here. Item 13.1 is the motion to fill the board nominating committee because of Director Zidane's resignation. So the motion reads, whereas pursuant to section 17 and schedule 8 of the CUSA committee's policy G-04, the board appoint one outgoing director to the board nominating committee. And whereas pursuant to section 5, subsection A of schedule 7, board nominations mandate letter G-04-7 of the CUSA committee's policy G-04, this director be a class 2 director as per sections 2, 3, and 4 of the same. And whereas pursuant to section 5 of schedule 7, board nominations mandate letter G-04-7 of the CUSA committee's policy G-04, the director be selected by lottery, be it resolved that to promote transparency and expedite the lottery process, that the random draw be held immediately following this motion.
Do you need to grab?
That is moved by myself, Director Sims, seconded by President Stoikos Materi. Time for discussion and nominate. Well, there are no nominations because it's a lottery process. The individuals who are eligible for this are any of the current one-term directors. So you have to be outgoing. And I am already on the committee as board chair, which means that I am not eligible to be put in the lottery. So I believe the individuals are, Jody, are you 1 year? So Jody, Sarah, you're 1 year, correct? And it's your 1 year. So the individuals would be Johannes, Sarah, and Jody. We will do, a random draw. If any of you would like to recuse yourselves,
Sarah, Jody, Johansson?
if any of you would like to recuse yourselves, now would be the time. You will, unless you choose to leave the committee, you will be the director who serves on the committee when we select the new directors who will replace the four of us for the year after.
I just have a question, for the committee, since you said that you want to also find a new director as fast as possible, so I'm assuming that, things are gonna be in motion really fast. Like, I work a full-time job, so I'm not sure, like, with meetings and stuff, how that will work. So I'm not sure if I should recuse myself from this, or.
So I wasn't on the board nominating committee last year, of course, 'cause I'm here, but yeah, Sam or Dustin, you may have.
I was just gonna speak to the point. I mean, selecting a director for 2 years is, I would say, pretty important. Because, the individual is gonna be there for 2 years. Understanding the difficulty in the summer of, attracting as many potential applicants as possible, we may want to stay the actual interview process for directors until September. Just to expand our reach as much as possible. Just as a suggestion. But that could also be up to the committee, could it not? Like the committee could make that decision
I believe that
or recommendation.
Let me find the terms of reference for that committee. I believe they set the timeline, yes.
When's our first meeting during the school year?
We don't meet until quite late.
October, I think.
So
Do we
that's
have
like
on
not-
our
that's
list of
not bad.
probably confirmed regular board dates?
Yes.
Would you be able to email us?
Yeah, we can't make it October.
There is no. Yeah, there is no timeline prescribed in the bylaws. So it may actually be advisable for us that, I know Carl, that was your concern, how fast are we going to do this? It may actually be in our best interest to wait until the end of summer for students to be back in school, especially because it's.
And I would ask, sorry, just one further point to Gabe's question. We don't, what would be the process of ratifying a selection? Does the board actually have to make a motion to do that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a quorum of directors. The actual section reads, a quorum of directors may, in consultation with the board nominating committee, fill a vacancy among the directors.
Right.
So we would.
Okay, and it doesn't mean the selection the selection should be done by then.
Yes.
And then at the meeting, it's ratified.
Yes. And we could always hold a special meeting at the end of September, although generally, it seems like leaving applications open for at least 2 or 3 weeks.
Mhm.
So perhaps the entirety of September and then conducting interviews over October and then ratifying at the end of October would be perhaps the most expedient way of doing it. And we would
Doesn't
because.
sound expedient.
No, but the other thing of waiting until September is it would capture the incoming first years, especially because this is a 2-year term.
A first year director. I'm good, I'm happy with like first year council, but first year director, that's not.
Well, obviously, it would be up to the board nominating committee to vet the
It's
applicant.
true.
Well, not all first year students who start in university right after high school, they could have lived for 3 years and starting at, 24 years old, and they're still technically a first year student. It's possible.
I would just say that we've had a lot of, runner-up candidates for a lot of like positions that we've been applying for in the recent months, and also, maybe the original board nominations. And so maybe we could, send a quick email just to let those individuals know that nominations are up for the board if they're interested. And then we can still do it over the summer.
Sure, that is up to the, well, I guess really at the end of the day, it's up to the board nominating committee how fast that process will be. We also have to find a student at large for the nominating committee. So finding a student at large will probably take a month. So by that point, we're already in August. It may be prudent at that point
We may
to.
not have a choice.
Well, and to be perfectly frank, it'll take a month to find a student at large. It'll take a month for the board nominating committee to come up with the promotion, the interview questions, the job posting. So, yeah, perhaps I will review my estimate, Director Laurie. It will probably happen by the October meeting.
So with that said, to answer Julie's initial question,
the first steps for the next little while will be finding a student at large. The next steps will be essentially creating a job posting for the board nominating committee, which will be posted on the CUSA website and left for 2 or 3 weeks, during which time the board nominating committee will probably come up with some interview questions, and then they will interview candidates. So based on the hiring committees I've sat on, the time investment in that is fairly minimal. I wouldn't.
and the scheduling is quite accommodating.
Yes.
Okay.
It's unlikely that, you know, so long as you've got, you know, an hour a week that you're able to. Sort of
Yeah.
this thing out.
No, that's
Like a random generator.
Yeah.
or laptop that we could use. I mean, that's.
But we already wrote them out, that's fine.
Yeah.
Sam will pick one.
So,
Lottery?
hold on, we have to actually, we actually have to first make the motion and then do the lottery.
Okay,
And then by making the motion, we've agreed that whoever is selected will become the.
okay.
So we have the motion to fill the board nominating committee that I read previously, moved by myself, seconded by President Stoikos-Lettieri. Do we have any further debate or discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, if you can raise your hands. All right, that is unanimous. I'll direct the executive director to make the random selection. And the official winning candidate is.
Sarah,
You accept the position, Director Zaglin?
Yep, sounds good.
Wonderful. All right, that's so much faster than doing it. I know, Sam, last year with the committees, you'd send people emails and then they decline, and then you'd send people emails and then they decline. All right, perfect. So I will send out an email to the board nominating committee at some point very shortly. We will, that is the director position, the outgoing director position on the board nominating committee, Donnie. It is explained in the board nominating committee, selection committee terms of references that's found on the documents page on the CUSA website. I can, Anastasia, can you maybe
Yeah, I'll send you.
link that in the. Perfect. So following that, moving on to item 13.2, the motion to fill the Constitution and Policy Review Committee. Be it resolved that pursuant to section 17 and schedule 1 of the CUSA Committee's policy G-04, the board appoint 2 directors to the Constitution and Policy Review Committee. That's moved by myself and seconded by President Stoikos-Lettieri. So nominations would now be in order for the CPRC. You can also self-nominate, which I may actually do. So Director Laurie.
Yeah, I would like to self-nominate.
Okay. So we've got, I'm just gonna put it in the agenda here. I'm gonna self-nominate too. I think I can do that. I was on this committee last year. And it was a very rewarding experience. So actually anyone who's interested in policy, you know, I would recommend if you're interested in policy to put yourself forward. So I will,
Just to clarify, we can still attend those committee meetings.
absolutely, yes.
This is for
You're-
like voting nights.
This is for, yeah, so the committee's policy, which I don't believe has been updated yet. The Constitution Policy Review Committee, I believe, is, it's a joint committee, which means that there should be 2 directors and 2 counselors. And then variety of other individuals, the vice president internal, I think perhaps Sam is a resource member as well. So I will call one final time for nominations for this committee.
How many councils are there? Sorry, 2.
There should be 2. I would have to find because council passed the mandate letter for this at their last meeting, and I don't believe it was updated on the website yet. Unless I am mistaken, no, alas, no.
All right, well, I think it's only you and Carl, so.
I believe that I can remain chair for this. Unless, if Simon was here, I'd just hand the chair over to him. Because we're not doing a vote, I believe it's all right, unless there's any objections. So seeing none, we have the motion to fill the Constitution and Policy Review Committee.
I'll just recuse myself for.
And I will recuse myself as well. Be it resolved that pursuant to section 17 and schedule 1 of the CUSA committee's policy G04, that the board appoint 2 directors. I'm actually going to amend my motion. So leaves from my motion, appoint so that
You can't move it now, can you?
I don't think so.
So do we-
Actually, I think I can, although I'd be quite happy to just let somebody else move it. It would perhaps look better. So do we have a mover for this? All right. We now have a motion on the floor. Be it resolved that pursuant to section 17 and schedule 1 of the CUSA committee's policy G-04, the board appoint directors Solari and Sims to the Constitution and Policy Review Committee. That is moved by Director Hopkins Charles and seconded by President Stoikos Lettieri. Is there any discussion or debate? Myself and Director Solari have recused ourselves. We can now move into voting procedure. All those in favor? That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in favor and 2 recusals. So that motion passes. So I will get that off to Gavin, who will be, I believe, coordinating the meetings of those. All right, moving on to item 13.3, the motion to fill the agenda subcommittee. Whereas there is a vacancy for 1 director on the agenda subcommittee of the board, be it resolved that blank be appointed to the agenda subcommittee of the board. That's moved by myself, seconded by President Stoikos Lettieri. Nominations would now be in order for the director who wish for the agenda subcommittee. Would you like to self-nominate? All right, so we've got a nomination from good and I, right?
Yes.
Nomination for Director Matthews. Do we have any other nominations? Seeing none, unless there are any objections, Director Matthews is the successful candidate. So the motion will now read, once I insert name.
Does anyone else find it hot up here?
It's quite warm.
Yeah,
Where's my fan?
It's actually really good.
it's gorgeous. I mean,
Do you want to use it?
Sure, yeah.
Full broken.
Is it the one, like, one of the ones you can like flip, like,
Yeah,
and you're like,
there you go.
Oh, you've given him a prop, watch out.
Oh, dear. All right, so the motion on the floor now reads, whereas there is a vacancy for one director on the agenda subcommittee of the board, be it resolved that Jody Matthews be appointed to the agenda subcommittee of the board. Moved by myself, seconded by President Stoikos Materi. Is there any discussion or debate on the issue? Seeing none, all those in favor? That is unanimous. Jody, congratulations. Simon will, I will make sure that Simon knows to include you for the next agenda subcommittee meeting. Moving on to item 13.4, the motion to launch the chief returning officer CRO hiring. So whereas the Democratic Reform Committee recommended an experienced individual without ties to CUSA be appointed as the chief returning officer. And whereas the CUSA Communications Office and CUSA Student Development will take on promotions, logistics, and many aspects of CUSA election facilitation previously undertaken by the former chief and deputy electoral officers. Be it resolved that a formal request for proposal in line with the CUSA procurement policy be launched in the form and style of a job application process. And there is the attached appendix. I see
I don't have access
you
to
don't
it.
have access to it.
I just requested.
I don't have access to it either, which is funny because I had access to it.
this access stuff is so annoying. Like, also, will this CRO also be, like, this person will be in charge of the council by election?
Yes, so this individual will be hired as CRO, I assume, for both elections, unless unless they are deemed unfit after the first election.
Can you just
Okay.
move the people to the other side for a second? Okay.
So so this, I assume, is the appendix that has been prepared by the CUSA Communications Office and CUSA Student Development. Is that correct, Sam?
Yes.
We're just. And so I assume that we are actually approving this, or are we approving you to sort of do what you need to do to finalize this?
Well, this, if you approve it, we would make it look nicer than this, but this can essentially be an interest package for people who wanted to apply to be the chief returning officer. So the only thing is we might have to, depending dates, it has to be open for a set amount of time, but other than that, nothing else on it would.
Do you want me to read through it?
I don't think we actually need to read through it unless the board wishes.
Yeah, because we didn't have access now, did anybody have a chance to read through this?
No, I can read through it if you like.
Sure. Go ahead.
So we've got the Chief Returning Officer CRO. So the Carleton University Students Association is an incorporated, not-for-profit, student-run organization dedicated to enriching the undergraduate student experience through events, advocacy efforts, and services. Position title, Chief Returning Officer, who reports to us, but managed by the Executive Director. They will be an external consultant, non-unionized, and the revised date for this will be June or July of this year. So, reporting to the CUSA board and managed by the CUSA Executive Director, the Chief Returning Officer supports the many facets of CUSA's elections. This includes ensuring CUSA executives and CUSA counselors prospective candidates and voters can access the ballot and have faith that the process was fair. The Chief Electoral Officer will, should that read Chief Returning Officer?
Yes.
There is nothing like a live and allow a read through to find spelling errors.
Where did you get the beautiful color from it?
My sister actually left in Spain.
Okay, yeah.
It broke, so that's why she gave it to me.
So I guess I can continue. I can. Consider
Yeah, I
that.
won't,
The
it
chief-
won't update on here, so.
Okay, the chief returning officer will support CUSA staff, Carleton University staff, any external elections contractors, the CUSA board of directors, and the CUSA council in the efficient and reputational running of elections. The chief returning officer ensures that structured touch points are established with candidates and campaign volunteers. The successful candidate for chief returning officer will get to join an exciting and innovative environment with students at its center and be responsible for executing new systems to ensure CUSA remains a model for ethical operations and student and staff development. The objective of the position: to promote fair and equitable democratic and electoral practices which develop positive candidate and voter experiences and allow CUSA to be a supportive and regenerative workplace, in particular optimizing candidate and voter interest and turnout. Duties and expectations. The chief returning officer shall report to the CUSA board and be managed by the executive director, except in cases where a conflict or perceived conflict of interest exists with the executive, in which cases the chief electoral officer may report to the university ombudsperson or a CUSA full-time staff member. The chief returning officer shall be responsible for officiating the electoral process and ensuring fair elections in conjunction with policies and offices within CUSA and Carleton as necessary. The chief returning officer shall themselves comply with CUSA Inc. letters patent, bylaws, policies, codes, and procedures, and ensure compliance of any instrument of elections. The chief returning officer shall oversee 3 elections per year, including an election in early October where the student body shall vote to fill any vacancies and vote on any referendum questions. An election in February where the student body shall vote to fill any vacancies and on any referendum questions. And an election in March where the up to 70 incoming and outgoing CUSA councillors shall vote for vice presidents in accordance with the current CUSA, the association bylaws, policies, and consolidated electoral code. The election in February is not only to fill vacancies, but it's actually the general election, is it not?
Yes.
So perhaps that should be rephrased if possible.
Yes, February where the student body shall vote
In general,
in the general election and on any,
Yes.
in the general election and on any referendum questions.
It's worth noting that we're not actually, I don't believe we're actually going to adopt the exact wording in this document, although perhaps we would be well advised to add a line in the motion that we're directing staff to write this, because that gives you like formal authority from the board.
we're not voting today to adopt this document. Are we?
We're directing you to undergo the process to launch the hiring, correct?
Yes.
So we're directing you to finalize the job posting and to start the process of hiring.
Yes.
This is a draft document that supports that.
Right. So the chief returning officer shall make regulations, procedures within policy for the good administration of the election. The chief returning officer shall seek legal advice within reason from CUSA's lawyers and experienced circumstances before solely determining matters of consequence, ensuring decisions are advisable beyond reproach and of sound mind. The chief returning officers shall submit themselves to both the CUSA conflict of interest declaration process and to any review of actions or decisions procedurally launched by the CUSA's governing bodies. Requirements: being an arm's length from the operations of CUSA, inability to be an eligible voter in the elections over which would occur in the term of the position, awareness and sensitivity to issues including but not limited to trans, bi, homophobia, sexism, racism, ableism, and ageism. Thorough knowledge and understanding of the electoral code and standard election procedure, ability to communicate effectively both in written and verbal form, and excellent organizational skills. So the desired experience running elections or serving as a CRO, experience with student government elections, and familiarity with the Not-for-Profit Corporations Act of 2010. Limitations: the chief returning officer who accepts the role is ineligible themselves to run for elected office in any election held within the current term of their role and within the term of council, even if the role of chief returning officer is resigned and the individual is otherwise eligible. Sitting and former executives, directors, or officers of CUSA, the Carleton Academic Student Government, CASG, the Rideau River Residents Association, the Carleton Graduate Students Association, are ineligible. Employees of CUSA ancillary or levy fee groups are ineligible. Individuals working for an entity that is in a lawsuit against CUSA are ineligible. Individuals in a lawsuit against CUSA are ineligible. And employees of or anyone within an arm's length of Carleton University administration or governance is ineligible. So the term and rate, August 22 to April 2023, approximately 2 hours a week in August, 6 hours a week in September, 15 to 20 hours a week the first 2 weeks of October, depending on election, approximately 2 hours per week from mid-October to December, 6 hours a week per week in January, 20 to 30 hours per week the first 2 weeks of February, depending on the election, approximately 6 hours from a week from mid-February to mid-March, approximately 2 hours a week from mid-March to the end of April. Rate can be variable by applicant depending on experience and qualifications. It is expected $30 an hour to $50 an hour may be reasonable. So how to apply? All applicants must submit a cover letter, resume, and rate proposal to CUSA's Director of Human Resources at jobs@cusaonline.ca by July 21st, 2022 at 11:59 p.m. EDT. Will we have a Director of Human Resources by
No,
that?
I just mentioned you to,
I'll change it to CUSA's Director of Finance and Administration.
Perfect. So as I say, we're not voting on that wording specifically, but we're voting that is the current proposed wording. So if anyone has any recommendations there.
other than the edits already identified.
I am going to, the chair would look favorably, President Stoikos Laturi, if you would amend your motion to read, be it resolved that the board direct staff to launch a formal request for proposal in line with CUSA procurement policy.
Just like senior management.
Senior management, generally it's written just direct staff. And then the appropriate staff person would take that over. We could also identify a staff person. We could also actually, if you would like, state the CUSA Communications Office and CUSA Student Development, because they are taking the role on.
Well, we'll
There
just
are-
put that the board direct senior management staff.
I believe, actually, we may need a formal amendment for that, so, no, because, yes, I believe because it was moved and is now on the floor, we will actually need a formal amendment, so we need a motion to amend procedure.
Oh, so do you want me to put this back to what it was before?
Well, let me copy that.
Samuel, do you mind moving the,
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know how it read before.
That's what I read before.
That text.
Well, because usually what the director of communications and strategy writes them, or
For the job descriptions. Hasn't been a specific person for years. It depends on the position.
well, like going forward, hopefully it'll be the director of finance and administration. So will we have that individual in time this one?
For this,
Yes.
Yes.
well, they start July 18th.
The deadline on this is after that.
So why don't we direct it to the director of finance and administration?
Because you're currently working on a request for proposal, right?
Mhm.
And you will post the job application, I assume, prior to the 18th?
Yes.
So this can't be directed to them.
Correct. Yeah. So we have a motion to amend proposal in line, so forth and so. Moved by
Direct
President,
A or just direct? Or you want to just? put
direct
staff?
staff, just direct staff, sorry. Direct staff to prepare. Do we have a seconder for this motion? Director Matthews? I assume that you're probably taking all this down as well, right, Sam?
Trying, yeah.
Correct.
It's also on recording now, so.
That is true. That's the nice thing about recording. So we can now insert, oh, well, we have to vote on the amendment. Is there any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, we can move into voting procedure. All those in favor of amending the motion's text? That is unanimous. So the motion on the floor now reads. Motion now reads, whereas the Democratic Reform Committee recommended an experienced individual without ties to CUSA be appointed as the Chief Returning Officer. And whereas the CUSA Communications Office and CUSA Student Development will take on promotions, logistics, and many aspects of CUSA election facilitation previously undertaken by the former Chief and Deputy Electoral Officers. Be it resolved that the Board direct staff prepare a formal request for proposal in line with the CUSA procurement policy be launched in oh heck, that's now grammatically incorrect. I think I can just correct the grammar
You
without.
can just correct the grammar, yeah.
And that the board.
I disconnected me as well.
Uh-oh,
Okay.
just had a blip, obviously, in the,
We're back.
we have actually lost power. I'm just,
Yeah.
it seems dark in here all of a sudden.
It might just be the clouds.
It feels dark in here. Anyway, so the motion is moved by President Circus Lettieri and seconded by Director Charles. Do we have any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, we can move into voting procedure. All those in favor, can you raise your hands?
Can I just, it seems like that, sorry, yeah.
Yep.
It seems like the board group is not on the Zoom anymore.
Uh-oh.
Is it still recording?
It is recording.
On whose?
This is on your channel. This is on your Zoom.
Oh, so,
There we are.
we're still there, it's just not, oh, as long as everyone's there, then that's okay,
Yeah.
I just wasn't
Yeah.
sure because it disconnected, I was just making sure.
right.
Sorry about that.
So back to voting procedure. All those in favor, can you raise your hands? That is unanimous. Okay, moving on to item 13.5. The motion to open a request for proposal for voting management of elections. I think I'm allowed to correct that. Whereas recommendation 3 of the Democratic Reform Committee final report adopted by council and the former CUSA Inc. trustee board reads that the future CUSA board of directors be charged with discussing the merits of having Carleton staff facilitate CUSA student at large elections in comparison to external options such as simply voting. The board should run a request for proposal process or a similar competitive process to determine the best course of action capable of the highest degree of flexibility in the future. Be it resolved that request for proposal be launched to solicit proposals from external entities which may include Carleton University on softwares and platforms for facilitating faculty-specific student representative CUSA council elections, CUSA presidential at-large elections, CUSA vice presidential elections through CUSA council, referenda, and student club elections. That motion is moved by President Stoikos Lettieri And I just realized that because it's technically not seconded, it's still your motion, which means
Okay,
it's
should
not on
I
the floor.
change it to
So you can add
staff?
staff without us having to amend.
Be it resolved,
The board
I'll just
direct,
copy.
yeah, the board direct
board
staff.
direct staff to the-
It's, yeah, it's still your motion until it's seconded. So
Oh, so it was for the other one as well.
it was for the other one as well. I
Okay.
just clued into that.
That's
um,
okay. All right, now it's done.
And once it's seconded, it becomes ours, and then we have to start amending it if we want to change anything. Do we have a seconder for this motion? Director Laurie? Do we have any discussion on this? I believe this was something that was put forward by staff. Do you want to speak to it?
Not just staff, we worked with the vice president internal as well to draft what is another interest package, essentially. So you've got it there, so let me get this out of the way for you. It's up to you, but yeah, so just reflects the needs that we've heard from Democratic Reform, from council, and from a few other entities. So there are a few things that Carleton University has not been able to provide, and so we've made specific mention of them in this request for proposal, and we'll see. We're very interested to see what we get back from this. It sounds like there are at least a couple companies already that are wanting to know when this will be launched. So word is out that we will be doing something like this, or we have looked into this over the last year.
So we've got something that's, so this is to replace, because what it used to be is the Carleton Senate would send out a ballot, right?
On that 2008, like, if
Yeah.
you look at.
So this is
Yeah,
to replace that system, correct?
Yes, I don't want to speak to the Senate's involvement, but there's, the Carleton Office of Planning and
Oh,
Institutional
right.
Resources.
It's that.
I believe, yes, they have run the election for a number of years. It used to be outsourced with a different company. We don't actually have much information on that, but they've been running the vote for a number of years now at a certain cost. And we hope that they will also submit a proposal, but it hasn't been, they haven't had competition for this type of contract for years. That much is certain.
And like the clubs do their elections pretty much individually, right?
Yeah, and the clubs are at the moment not using any software provided by Carleton or otherwise. So it's a major gap, and I think Davin and I heard concerns from the staff in that office, and I think they passed something along to you folks as well on some kind of path forward. But yes, so we based this, the draft, the exhibit here, the request for proposal, on what we've seen other students unions put out. And we put some Carleton specific stuff in there because we happen to have some specific concerns that come up year over year in our election that we want to make sure these companies are aware of.
Absolutely. Which reminds me, actually, I had asked for it to be included in the agenda, and I see it didn't get included in the agenda. We got a letter from Hannah Whale.
But I think that would come once this is actually,
Yes.
like, this is the first step. I think she was just sending it to us
Yes.
for a review, but I don't think it needs to be included in this agenda.
Probably not,
Because we
although
haven't even approved the request for proposal.
Although it
so
does-
That wouldn't be fair.
it does speak to the desire for some software to be available for clubs. So I will, did I share that with everyone? Did I email that to everyone?
You
Good,
did, yeah.
good. Perfect.
Okay, so is this being approved, this request for
Well,
proposal?
we're going into the vote right now, yeah.
We are, do we want me to read the proposal again, or?
That one is a lot longer.
It's 5 pages.
And that one, the only reason why I said to read the other one is because we didn't have access to it, but this one we had access, so directors could have read it ahead of time.
I would also, like, I mean, what I would say about this particular request for proposal, like, you know, I'm on the clubs committee, and I know how valuable this software would be, but I mean, personally, in my evaluation of the software on the market, like, I heard very good things about Simply Voting, But we also like, while we were at the conference and we were speaking to different students associations, they use some software that is more expensive, but offers like a lot more, like is much more fully featured. We saw a couple programs that, a couple sorts of software that include voting as like a sub feature among like many others, like event booking, a space for clubs, like the failed CUSA hub, which was an attempt basically to achieve this, but was poorly managed and is now defunct. But it's like very successful. There was a program, Anthology Engage, which is used by New York University and Arizona State University and a lot of others that includes like a whole suite of features, like including data, like a data tracking part where we are able to tell how many students are using certain services by having them, for example, when they attend an event, they have to scan a QR code, which many students are already used to with CU Screen, but of course the QR code will basically be like payment because which is, I think students are much more willing to do than CU Screen, which was, not an effective program. So if we're doing a request for proposal for voting management, like for voting management software, I think that there also the board should look favorably upon comparing it not just to other voting softwares, but looking at the whole suite of software out there that also includes voting as part of its services. The other ones are software as a service, whereas simply voting is a one-time purchase, and they are much more expensive. And down the line, we might have to look at someone facilitating the program, maybe a student staff member. But I think in the past there has been an effort to try to solve problems with, one solution and not look at, the grander picture. I know that there might be some like, so
To action, what you're talking about, if I may make a suggestion, click through on the exhibit, and I know you're gonna give staff the authority to edit this, so I'll do my best to allay whatever concern there may be. We could add as a desirable or something that would be an asset to make a stronger application. If your proposal includes how this software could be expanded to be much larger than elections.
And maybe we can just put an amendment on the motion to say like to include, software that's not necessarily just voting software.
well, this motion here is asking
Fine.
staff to prepare a request for proposal, right? Like I understand the appeal of maybe putting the onus on like the salespeople at those companies, but instead, like when our staff are preparing like this whole request, why don't we just include that they like also seek votes from like companies that offer a larger suite of services and
That's what you can put in this document right now.
Yeah.
We're here.
Yeah, so essentially the motion as written is not actually telling staff to, and this is sort of splitting hairs, but the motion is written actually just tells staff to solicit proposals from external entities who have software and platforms that can facilitate
Oh, so it's already.
student elections.
It's already wrong.
But it doesn't say that that software and platforms need to be specifically for elections. It just says that that software or platforms needs to facilitate those elections. So if the software is broader than that,
It's still acceptable.
it's still acceptable.
And maybe you gave,
So-
if you, saw some of those, softwares, you could send
yeah, like I mean
the listing to them, like you could send them an email with the listing, or just bring to your attention.
Yeah, so we
do.
The softwares that you're mentioning, you said, why don't we work for them? Well, you can always pass along the, listing to them.
Because, so essentially, because the terminology solicit implies that staff are actually not only going to put it out there, but they are actually going to be contacting companies.
This is, and I'll say it, but this is a request for proposal that's now been in the works since October.
Yeah.
Whereas we've made no movement. on a larger clubs facilitation, anthology engage, those kinds of things. So maybe there needs to be more consideration before we jump down that rabbit hole. It would certainly be an asset of a company if we start working with them on this election and then we find out they can expand, it's the same logins, there would be a relationship there already. But I know there's so much to consider in the club's management software alone, let alone if you want to start talking about service centers, events and whatnot, that maybe fitting it into this is narrow. I agree with you. But it's also well considered and it's the result of work, not just from this group or staff, it's from a Democratic Reform Committee that was informed by consultants and guests and student experience.
I agree that this is well considered, but like going forward with like the purchase of the software, like Simply Voting, in my opinion, would close the door to the purchase of Anthology Engage in like for at least like 4 or 5 years. That's just my opinion, like for us to get
Okay,
out.
maybe we'll
But
receive a proposal from them.
Well,
From
so,
Anthology.
so I
So
think
what-
it would- because we would need to get the value out of that software, which would require like a certain amount of elections to then equal how much we spent, like we sent to the university to facilitate our elections, like for the net comparison. Like we would have to use it for a certain amount of years. It would be like, I think it would be very limiting if we went forward with the purchase of say Simply Voting. And then we were like, look, no, we want a clubs facilitation software, but like we just purchased the software, like, I don't, you know,
Thank you, Greg. We don't have the proposals yet. Like I don't know why we're talking about precluding someone, like this is just a public call for proposals. I hope we get some from companies. We can do our own research and find out what they're capable of providing. And it sounds like, well, you're on this board, you're gonna make a case not for Simply Voting, even though we know that they're likely to submit a proposal, but for something else. But I don't know why are we having this now before we even have proposals from these companies? We don't know what we're gonna receive.
Simply Voting is like an open check case. When we receive
Yeah,
the
I think we
proposals, that's
can,
what's
we
gonna
can
be our.
just, I mean, let's.
That
we
is
should-
not, that is not the case. That's why we're having a
Okay,
competitive
so we
process.
should steer away from talking about the companies or softwares that will potentially
Yeah.
submit proposals. We don't have those proposals in front of us to consider. So let's just say, Gabe, does this motion satisfy your sort of question that you want to make sure that we can accept proposals from other like softwares, not just only voting softwares?
The thing is that it's gonna be, like, in my opinion, it's gonna take a staff person some time to do a direct comparison between a software that is only limited to voting and one that has a lot more, like, as many more features. It would require a comparison of, like, do we need a student staff person to facilitate just this one feature? So it's gonna be like a probably an expansive document, an expansive brief for the board of directors to go through. And like, just receiving them for like, you know, like, I agree that this, like, I mean, I know Hannah is like very interested, it's very important that we get a software for voting, because right now there's just a million fires for student groups administrator put out like every year. But I just want to make sure that we're considering all of our options, because in the past, there's been a push to solve one problem when we could be solving.
Okay,
So-
so I'm confused though, so are you saying that, does this motion, we're not there yet, is what we're saying to you?
The request for proposal, the objective is to compare many different options, but all those options in this case just pertain to voting, whereas I'm saying there's software out there.
Right,
That-
but where are the
that's-
options listed?
So,
The request for proposal, Sam, am I right in saying that it's to look for many options, like Simply Voting is the one that's mentioned, and that's why I'm like, my assumption is that that's the one that is ultimately the most appealing thus far. But like like in the past, like in the past, if a CUSA executive saw that, when things weren't governed properly, they might just say, well, that's the one we're gonna get. This is an attempt to look at all the options available on the market and do this the proper way. In my opinion, the proper way is also to field many different applications from different companies that offer services that include voting as a part of a grander suite of software.
So here's the thing, here's what I'm thinking is happening. Hannah sent the request from Simply Voting to Gray, and he accidentally emailed it to all of us ahead.
no, I intended to send it to you,
Well,
as a piece of informational correspondence.
well, maybe we shouldn't have had, maybe we
No,
should
there's been a
have.
misunderstanding, and that has nothing to do with it at all.
No,
I
I think, Dave, if I understand correctly, your concern is that if we go ahead with this request for proposal, we will essentially be putting the request for proposal for a broader and more useful potentially software on the back burner for 5 years or something. Is that's sort of the crux of your concern, right?
It's just the objective of the whole point
Right.
of reforming our system to include something like a request for proposal system is just that the objective is to get more options. And so in order for us to actually achieve that goal is to look at all the options, not just all the options for voters.
But
So-
that's what it says here, like, that's
So-
what I'm confused, because we haven't only looked at simply voting, like,
If
there's
we
not.
get requests for proposals from say Anthology Engage, they're gonna say this is the price tag. And then comparing it dollar for dollar with simply voting is just not, it's just not gonna work. Like,
Yeah,
that's not how
but
it-
if you have something to back up the Anthology and, that's a software, then you can present, Hannah said we can attend.
I can't lead that discussion out of thing. And so
But Hannah said we can attend, like a little like navigational thing on it, like, so we could request those types of things at the board level, like, nobody's making a decision right now. Right now, what we're deciding is that there's a need to find a voting system. And we're approving or, getting a staff to prepare a request for that. And then if there are, if your concerns are not met when the proposals come, we can talk further.
so
Consider.
the system like.
So I think you're, just to sort of, to wrap this discussion up a little bit. Maybe a proposed solution here would be to go ahead with the request for proposal, see what we get. Obviously, Gabe, you'll be in the office, you are a part of staff. You can work with whoever's putting this request for proposal together to try and include some of, looking for some of these things. Let's see what we get. Let's see what Simply Voting comes back with. It may be that Simply Voting or a software like it, ultimately is the best option. We don't know until we have the proposals, right? Ideally, we will get some proposals from companies like the ones you're mentioning that offer a broader range. And in the interim, or right now, we can set this request for proposal in motion. But we can also, if you like, we can also actually make another motion right now to direct staff to initiate the request for proposal for something like that. If you would like, I know that's a lot of work for staff, but it's something, at least that way we're getting this out of the way.
So you're saying 2 different requests for proposal?
Essentially,
But
yes.
it's the same request.
Yes, it's not that, yeah.
Not so much. The other request would be a request for an all-encompassing software. Whereas this request is for.
Well,
it-
I don't think
No,
we should have 2
I don't think
separate, I think we
I
need one
think this
request.
is one request because it says, we just ran through this. For
So if-
softwares and platforms for facilitating faculty-specific student representative elections, but facilitating doesn't mean that's the only thing they facilitate.
Right, I'm just gonna, Director Laurie.
Would it help if we remove the words such as simply voting in the motion?
Yeah, I don't really know why.
I don't know,
that's in
I
there,
don't know
which
why
is-
So
Simply
that,
voting.
that's a
May I answer why that's in there? Yeah, well, Greg already had it. It's a direct quote.
It's a direct quote from the
Democratic Reform.
Democratic Reform Committee.
I wouldn't have put it in there either, but.
So,
Sorry, but like, so my worry is that, the whole point of the board of directors is to make decisions that are supposed to be for the long-term growth of the organization, right? The pressing issue right now, and this isn't something to blame, this is an effective way of thinking on student groups administrator behalf, is to look at something like a Simply Voting, if we're saying it. And saying, this is gonna address my problems, therefore, that's the one, that's like the kind of system that I'm looking at. The point of the directors is to be like, well, wait a minute, if we invest in this platform, it's gonna mean that to get the most out of it, please, give me a second. It's gonna take like 5 years for
Right.
our investment to pay off, right?
Right.
So we need to look at it like, if we get a software that's gonna do a lot more than that, meet goals that right now our staff aren't looking at because they have pressing issues that something like simply voting would address. The directors have to set that strategy up. We have to look at it and say, this is what our ultimate goal is. And so when we're looking at a request for proposal, we also have to be fielding software from a company that's offering a larger solution. That's not immediate, but the new software, a larger software could also address those immediate issues. That's my,
Yeah.
So just a second, Anastasia. So your recommendation here essentially would be to delay this process for a couple of months to reformat the request for proposal?
I don't know why it would
to-
take a couple of months and
Well,
Okay, so
Um,
could I just say something? I think, like, Gabe, we understand what you're saying. Number one, most of what your conversation, like, most of that conversation is going to happen anyways when the proposals come in. And number two, if there are some edits that need to happen to this request for proposal, it says direct staff to prepare request for proposal. You can go and request your changes.
I don't think it's good that that conversation has happened because that conversation needs to be happening. Yeah. So,
But it's
The-
going
well,
to
the other-
happen. We're just not there yet, Gabe.
But the other thing is, I think we are not bound
Mhm.
by any of the proposals we get. So we can send out a request for proposal and we may get 10 proposals back and go, you know what? None of these would address our long-term concerns. So we can say, well, that was a big waste of time, but none of these address our long-term concerns. In the meantime, well, this request for proposal is out there. Staff can be drafting a new request for proposal for an all-encompassing system, and we'll see what we get here, right?
Sarah has her hand raised.
Yeah,
Sarah?
just to add to that, Kate, would it make you more comfortable if we reworded this slightly to instead of saying, in the second paragraph, which may include Carleton University, blah, 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 on softwares and platforms for facilitating faculty-specific student representative, if instead of saying for facilitating those elections, if we said softwares and proposal, and like softwares and platforms that may be used for, and then that's a little bit more all-encompassing language, and that can invite broader platforms to come into the conversation. And then as Gray is saying, we can assess each platform on its merits. And if we don't like any of them, we don't have to go with any of them.
I mean,
Yeah, the chair, this would be up now to the board, but I would look favorably on an amendment, Director Zalen, if you would like to amend the text of the motion to read something along the lines of softwares and platforms, which include tools to facilitate.
Is which includes, does that mean only programs that are all encompassing now?
No, it would be which include. So a software may include only a tool to be used in voting. A software may include several other tools, one of which is voting, but the amendment's not on the table.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm writing it right now. Softwares and platforms, which include tools to facilitate what exactly?
Then just continuing on with the text that's there, which would include tools for facilitating faculty-specific student representative CUSA council elections, CUSA presidential at-large elections, et cetera, the text that's there. It's really only changing that one word, just so it's a little bit broader.
Confusing now.
well, no, I think
No,
all
it's
of,
just getting confusing, Gabe, I don't like, we're not at the point of conversation right now where we're talking about like considering these proposals in their long term.
well, we can't
Yeah.
waste that time.
But we're
proposing
not
amendments and doing
wasting
it.
staff time. If you'd like to help prepare the request for proposal, then you can help prepare the request for proposal. And why don't we add a sentence at the end instead that says, like that this request for proposal, consider objectives contributing to our long-term strategic planning,
All of these last things pertain directly to elections. That's the concern.
So as I understand it, this request for proposal they started writing this in October because it was written to address the voting management of elections. So essentially, if I can be a little crass, staff time's already been wasted on this. If we now change directions, staff time will have already been wasted on this. So
Great.
I see I see no issue with putting it out there. And if we are changing directions, we're not actually, we're not wasting any further time if that's our long-term goal anyway.
When would this have been considered before? Like, if it's from October, if the proposal's from October, like, I mean, that's great, but when would it have been proposed before, by the trustees? Like, would we really have wanted that decision to have been made then? Like, I just don't think so.
Well, hang on, no, the trustees themselves didn't want the decision made then.
Perfect, exactly, that's why it has to be made now, so saying that it was
We're not
written in
making-
October, it's not really relevant, because we wanted this decision to be made now.
I'm just pointing to the fact that it has taken since October to bring this to the board. I don't know if we want to take the time now, Gabe, to delay the process of finding a software before the next election. I think the debate here is getting a little bit repetitive and it's not feeling particularly constructive. Does anybody have anything new or any suggestions that can be made to fix or to resolve the issues that we're seeing here? President Lettieri and Director Zaitlin, your amendment would still be in order if you would like to make it. President Lettieri, something?
Yeah, and I would just say, like, even just the motion that how it says, CUSA elections, right? Like, in my opinion, it's not like the people who are requesting, who will be submitting proposals aren't gonna read this motion. So it's like, if your concern is that because it says elections, that's what we're identifying, like an area that needs improvement, and that's what we're looking at. But, when it comes to looking at those proposals, we need to consider obviously the bigger picture, and we will, and that's why, and you can resurface this conversation then, and so I don't think we should make any amendments.
So we can also simply say, we can add a further be it resolved, and we can simply say that the board directs staff to review proposals from software companies who both provide only voting software as well as voting software as part of a larger software package, which would directly direct staff and directly point out the board's intention that we should not only be looking at voting software, but we should be looking at the broader. It is possible that a program like Simply Voting, where you only pay for it once, it is possible that there will be extreme bang for buck there. It is possible that that will be the program, that there will be a program that comes through this proposal where we will go, yes, that's what we want. We don't even need to write a request for proposal for this all-encompassing software, because this company has come forward and has said, here's what we've got, and we've gone, this is perfect. It is possible that it will save us a lot of time, that someone will just come forward and say, we have everything you need.
Yeah, and I think we won't even need to write a second request for proposal because it's the same idea, but I agree with that amendment, and
So-
I would second that amendment.
So if the board agrees, I would make a motion to amend this motion that the following text be inserted. Be it resolved, here I can write this in, Sam, if you like.
Further resolved.
Be it further resolved. Yeah. Be it further resolved that the board directs staff and the fact to pursue, I suppose, because essentially we're going to be reviewing whatever proposals come our way anyway, to pursue or to solicit proposals from companies. I assume they're companies that from companies that
Provide softwares and platforms,
provide software platforms,
softwares and platforms.
softwares and platforms.
Well, how would you phrase that, Gabe? Like that are
That
that either only this, that only
The software does a million things, like, this is why, like, I mean, I understand. Again, like,
Well, okay, so that
Director
either,
Zaitlin?
That
Sure.
provides services including but not limited to elections and voting.
no, from
Is that
companies
to your
no.
liking, Director Zaitlin?
No.
That includes-
Works for me more or less. I don't, this is not like,
Facilitation?
I think, so that the board directs staff to solicit proposals from companies that provide softwares and platforms that. Wait, it's not like.
that provides services
That provides
including but not limited to election facilitation.
Which?
Election facilitation and other,
Including
you
but
know,
not limited to.
Including but not limited to elections facilitation.
and
I'm going to make it,
administrative,
I'm going to make it
very clear.
broad, and say include and. Well,
But doesn't include the not limited to make it broad?
yeah, it would. If this is to everyone's liking, I think this should resolve the issue. It will get us moving ahead with it. It will mean that we get to see what we get, and that then we can move forward at that point. I think that's probably the most advisable option, because we are, as we know, we are going to come upon a by-election in October. It would be really nice to have. Ideally, the Carleton University will come back with us and say, hey, we will keep doing it for an annual fee of X. And we'll say, great, we can use you for this year for your one annual fee because that's cheap. And we can use the next year to find a new software. That would be great if we get a proposal like that. If we don't, we'll see what we get and we can move forward from there. But I think it's probably better to do. It's probably better to be moving forward with this.
Should we just use the word with here instead of which provide?
That provide services and platforms.
Provide softwares and platforms with services including but not limited to elections facilitation.
I think that's reasonable.
Yeah, okay.
So that's
And
moved by
that's-
myself. And was that seconded by you, Director Zalem,
I
or?
seconded it.
Or, yeah,
I believe I heard you second that, but I'm not.
I seconded it, but it's okay.
Moved
I'll
by,
second it.
seconded by Director Zalem.
I seconded it.
Oh.
Holy shit, enough.
It is up to the chair to decide who seconds. And I was under the impression that it was Director Zalem prior to the president, so moved by myself, seconded by Director Zalem, that the following text be inserted into the motion. Be it further resolved that the board directs staff to solicit proposals from companies that provide softwares and platforms with services including but not limited to elections facilitation. Does that make everybody happy? Is there any more discussion on this? On the amendment to insert this text? Seeing none, we can move into voting procedure. All of those in favor of the amendment to insert the text? That is unanimous. So the motion moved by President Soikos-Leturi and seconded by Director O'Leary now reads, whereas recommendation 3 of the Democratic Reform Committee final report adopted by council and the former CUSA trustee board reads that the future CUSA board of directors be charged with discussing the merits of having Carleton staff facilitate CUSA student-at-large elections in comparison to external options such as simply voting. The board should run a request for proposal process or a similar competitive process to determine the best course of action capable of the highest degree of flexibility in the future. Be it resolved that the board directs staff to prepare a request for proposal. And that, I'm just going to put an and that it be launched to solicit proposals from external entities which may include Carleton University on software and platform for facilitating faculty-specific student representative CUSA council elections, CUSA presidential at-large elections, CUSA vice presidential elections through CUSA council, referenda, and student club elections. Be it further resolved that the board directs staff to solicit proposals from companies that provide software and platform services, including but not limited to elections facilitation. Is there any further discussion on this motion? Hearing none. All those in favor, raise your hands. All right, that passes unanimously. So, yeah, staff will do that. And Gabe, I mean, I certainly encourage you if you want to be involved in that process. I think that would be certainly valuable. Yeah.
Great, can we have a recess, please?
We can have a recess. I believe I can just do that myself. The chair calls a recess for 5 minutes. We can return at 11:36.
2:36.
2:36. My computer's still 3 hours behind. I just looked down there. Yeah, that's fine.
Dave, can you make sure they have the AC on down there for up here?
I can like feel it slightly coming inside that.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
should I do the recording?
Can you pause?
Well, no, I would just,
Pause the recording, nothing's happening.
but I just, then it'll make it.
Oh, yeah, I can just use
Carly
that.
to like upload it all, right? Okay, you can stop it and record it after. Do you know how to say that?
I don't know what would be more complicated, honestly.
Pause.
Pausing or stopping. Pausing will put it all in one video. It'll just
Oh,
edit
then
it all
pause it.
there.
Then
Okay.
pause it.
Yeah, we're gonna pause.
And you got it.
Back to order right now, at 2:45. And we are on item 13.6, the motion to develop a long-term strategic plan for CUSA. Whereas most nonprofit corporations have a long-term strategic plan, and whereas the board is responsible for ensuring the legal, reputational, and financial strength of the corporation, and whereas a long-term strategic plan will help the board, executive, and council plan for the future of CUSA, be it resolved that the board direct the president, vice presidents, internal, and director of student development to research the long-term strategic plans of other student associations to present to the board and council at their regular August meeting. Be it further resolved that the board direct the president and the vice president internal to draft a procedure for creating the long-term strategic plan to present to the board and council at their regular August meetings. Be it further resolved that once a plan for consultation with council, the board, the executive, senior staff, union staff, business members, and the members has been developed, a committee consisting of members of the same be created to draft the long-term strategic plan to present to council and the board for their joint approval by May 2023. That motion is moved by President Lettieri and seconded by Chair Sims. That's me.
I added, and Director of Student Development to the second bit for the result, just because it was supposed to be on, it's not the same as the first one.
Okay.
Like, that's like.
I don't know if it was supposed to be the same as the first one.
Are you, it was not supposed to?
It doesn't really matter.
I think it was, I think we just forgot to write it down in
Okay.
both of them.
I mean-
That's what we had agreed on.
It doesn't have to be all three of you, any three, but that you are the three who will be doing that. Yes, Gabe?
So what are the strategic goals?
Well, that's going to be, like, this is literally a plan to start the plan.
Yes, so this
Okay,
is,
so then it should be about developing the strategic goals, not the plan. This, the board of directors should approve what the goals are before we proceed with this.
So-
That's not. up to us.
Anastasia, so the motion, the first be it resolved is that the president, the vice president internal, and the director of student development, the first part of the motion, they will research the long-term strategic plans of other students associations to see how they've been done, what they are and how they've been done and what their goals are. Then, the president, the vice president internal, and the student development will create a plan for us to come up with the long-term strategic plan. So who will we be consulting? When will they be consulting? What the timeline is? No, seriously, this is like so administrative. It is the plan to make the plan.
This is all about
Well, why
a
don't we just
procedure for
say-
creating the plan.
Yes.
Why don't we just?
Yes, it is.
But
Why-
we need the goals, right?
Not,
We're just gonna be making a.
But we
plan
don't have
in, like,
so we don't have a plan to find out what our goals are yet. So we need a procedure. I think this is correct. Dustin, you've probably done this, certainly more than me.
Yeah, generally speaking, a strategic plan assumes that you have long-term strategic goals.
Yeah,
And therefore, the strategic plan would be framed around how do we meet those long-term strategic goals. So any strategic planning process would essentially begin establishing what your goals are.
So that's not what this does.
so we can add a,
Well, it does because the goals are part of the plan. It's the first part of the plan.
For clarity, can I move that saying 3 individuals write a sort of a recommendation of goals to bring to the board alongside all this other information?
so I would disagree with that simply because what we've done here, and I was getting to the final be it further resolved, that the plan for consultation will be ultimately, there will be consultation with council, board, executive, senior staff, union staff, business members, and the members at large. And a committee of representatives of those groups will come up with the goals together. And then once they have the goals, the long-term strategic plan will be written. So
So
it's-
essentially, in our plan, we need to include like a phase for, include like a phase for bringing all these different stakeholders together to draft the goals, needs to be a part of the plan.
So does that, Dustin, does that make sense in the scheme of things? Does it make sense to sort of start by developing how we're going to create the goals? Because I think it seems sort of counterproductive, in my opinion, if we just have, say, Anastasia and Sam and Davin sit down and write some goals. It makes more sense to come up with those goals with consultation. And then once we have the goals, then we're determining the plan. But we have to know how we're going to do this, because otherwise we're going to be going all over the place. We're going to be going to goals, and we're going to be suddenly going, oh my goodness, we've got these goals, how are we going to meet them? So coming up with the initial process of how we're going to do it, how we're going to make sure everybody's involved, and how other students associations have done it is sort of integral. It's the integral first step to make sure that the rest of it isn't a shit show.
Our job is to facilitate. It should be to draft the goals, right? Not to draft the plan. We should be in charge of the plan because that's what the organization does.
Yeah, no,
Sarah?
we've got a couple people.
Oh, it's redundant to what Gray was saying, but I was just clarifying, Gabe. The point is that the goals shouldn't, to my understanding, and I want to clarify to ensure that I'm getting this correctly as well, we are not instructing those executive members to create goals, because the goals should be representative of the needs and reflections of the broader community. So we are instructing the executive to make a plan for a process in which we will consult the broader community, create those goals, and set out like a process by which we will go about revising, revisiting, etc. those goals, which will then lead to the creation of those goals, which will subsequently be brought back to the board and committee to approve. Is that a correct understanding of the process that's being
That
put
is
forward?
far more succinct than anything I was going to say. That's exactly right, yeah. Carl?
But it doesn't say anywhere that there will be consultation about the goals, it's just about the plan, that's my understanding.
Okay, so
You could simply add
Yeah.
in the consultation, for, identifying the various components of the plan, such as goals, timeframes,
Well,
preferred
that's
strategic projects.
That's
stuff
what
like
all strategic plans have, so
so
all of those components, like, in my understanding, that's what we're gonna be doing anyways.
So we can either expand on the second be it further resolved, drafting the procedure and then listing how that procedure should be, but it makes more sense to me to just let them draft the procedure. Then they'll present it to board and council, and board and council will approve the procedure. Does that make sense? The other option being, we can add in the third be it further resolved, a plan for consultation has been developed, a committee consisting of members of the same be created to develop goals and draft the long-term strategic
But
plan.
that would be in this, that would be in the strategic plan that we're working.
That would be
That would be.
covered under the
That's not
second be it further resolved, likely.
That's-
I would argue if this group came to the table with a plan that didn't include a process for identifying the strategic goals, I would probably raise my hand and say, I think you have a bad plan in front of you.
Yeah, like, I think we should just leave this as is.
Admittedly, and perhaps a bit ironically, the reason for directing the president, the vice president, and director of student development to draft the procedure was so that we didn't have to sit around the table and discuss what exactly was going to be said. I think it's actually a really important part of it, and it's a really valuable part, but that was the intent of the second be it for the resolve, that they would be going, and, step one is goals. Well, step one is actually figure out how we're going to consult. Step two,
Identify the goals.
identify the goals. Step three, how are we going to meet them? Step four, right? So does that sort of satisfy your concern, Dave?
I don't think that would be satisfied, so.
Well, I mean, would you rather the extent of or would you rather the board's involvement in this be increased?
Look, I think that's stating the consultation with members, whatever. I think the board needs to consider, are you taking away your own like your own powers away from yourself? Because this is like the last part, it's a presentation of the plan. The plan is made by the board. Is that not why we're here to direct that future? So the goals should be made in consultation, 100% agree. But the plan itself, like students at large don't know about the operational realities of CUSA, so the board should be informed of those.
Hence the committee would have resource, and the committee would be like any other committee with resource members, right? That they would come up with something, they would make a proposal to board and council for joint approval by May 2023. And they would likely, board and council are likely going to bat it back and forth with their amendments. I'm just going to stop for a second. Sarah, sorry, I didn't see your amendment there.
If I can speak on it, I don't fully think the amendment's necessary. I'm fine with it as it is, but going off of what other people were saying about they wanted to ensure that we were very clear that we wanted consultations to be part of the process. All I did was I added like 2 words in that like 3rd paragraph where I said to draft a procedure inclusive of community consultations for creating the long-term strategic, just to direct whoever's making the plan that we'd like to see consultations. To speak to Gabe's concern about taking power away from the board, my understanding of our role as the board is that like we are a volunteer entity that has a very like wide mandate. We don't necessarily have the time as individuals to dedicate to be doing these consultations ourselves as board members and running that whole process logistically. That's for the staff. Our job is to set out those expectations, and then if those expectations are met, to approve them or ask them to go back to the drawing table, et cetera, et cetera. So that's also, Gabe, why I'm saying that like the board itself, I don't think needs to be the ones writing the,
No.
yeah.
But to be the one that approves it, right? Like,
Which is in that last paragraph.
The last part in that is that the long-term strategic plan will be approved jointly by board and council.
Is that what you're concerned about, the joint approval at the end?
no, the plan, I just don't know why I mean, okay, I guess.
Well, consultations
I still
are
don't know why it
important
doesn't
because
include goals anymore.
everyone. But, okay, what is the foundation of a strategic plan? Why would we write a redundant word like goals when a strategic plan is literally the goals for your organization going forward? Like a strategic plan literally is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 numbered goals of what you're going to do in however many years or whatnot. Like that is literally what a strategic plan is. And having that consultation is because nobody like me and, you know, VPI don't have the extensive knowledge that every single staff member in those, you know, or every single person in those different jurisdictions have to understand fully what, you know, we might miss something. Like they, you know, the business managers might have a really good sense of something that we might not 100% know, which is why their consultation is important.
So for clarity, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dave, I don't think you have an issue with that, with the consultation part. Gabe is only concerned that we're missing a step.
But we're not missing that
Right.
step.
The consultation is about the goals, not
But-
the final plan.
But
So
once a plan for consultation.
Anastasia, so you would like to see, if I'm getting this correctly, you would like to see that final be it further resolved broken in 2. You would like to see the first step of the final be it resolved for that committee to come up with some goals, present it to the board and council perhaps in December. And then from December to May, write the strategic plan, which would then be approved in May. Would that sort of satisfy your concerns, that then we would get to see the goals before they would start writing the strategic plan?
Yeah, I mean, I already thought that was included, but my point is that the goals should be developed collaboratively, whereas a plan being developed by like members at large, I just don't really see like, if this is developed in consultation, it's a presentation to the members, not a collaborative consultation for a plan.
I literally don't understand. Goals are what a strategic plan
Okay,
is.
so I think Anastasia,
That's not at all true.
That is true.
no, so I think we're getting a bit into the weeds here.
A plan is how you do it.
So perhaps it would be simplest to break it into the final be it further resolved. Identify that committee will first come up with goals. Dustin?
I might have a simpler solution.
It's simple as good.
So just to research the long-term goals and strategic plans.
And be it resolved.
Be it resolved, where be it
The
resolved,
first
the
be it resolved.
long-term
research-
strategic goals and plan. Just
So
specifically
just-
going goals and,
Okay,
Yeah.
before plan, before the word plan, just say goals and plan.
okay, that, would that satisfy your,
Yeah,
and the other thing being, we can add another date, we can add December.
And I would argue, and this is to the point that you are making, Dave, about the consultation piece, is that you should be consulting on the plan with your senior staff, because they're the ones who are gonna have to implement it. And so they need to consult on the viability of certain actions and tactics that are taken, which will be part of the plan.
Yeah, the degree.
So that consultation is appropriate.
well, the consultation with members though, of students, like, it just doesn't really seem
So
feasible to
this
be
will
talking
be-
to people outside the organization.
So it'll be a committee, right? Well, probably ideally there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different categories. So there will probably be about 14 people on this committee. Will all of them show up? Will the members ever even show up? Quite possibly not. But the fact of the matter is there will be a space for all of these individuals around the table. They will have an input as representatives of the student body. They won't have the final say. They'll simply be there to pipe up every once in a while and go, hey, don't forget that while you're making sure that the corporation's doing well, you are helping students, right? I think it's important because we are a students association, because our end goal is working for students, we need to make sure that the members have a part. If you are doing this for a municipality, if you're creating your official community plan, you create it with people. You would have a committee with representatives of the population sitting on it.
Can I just also say, like, I really just think we should just go to voting, because I just think it doesn't need an amendment, because it's literally, we're creating.
President
we're creating a
Lettieri, are
strategic
you
plan.
calling for, the vote on the question?
Yeah, because we're creating a strategic plan to bring those goals and like those goals.
So
and
are you
ideas.
calling the question?
Yes.
Okay. So the president has called the question on the motion as written. I am now bound to call the question on the motion as written. However, I'm gonna have to consult Robert's rules here, I think. I believe if we want to amend it, we first have to defeat calling, oh boy. I'm gonna have to, because if we want to make any amendments, like adding the word goal, would you prefer first, I'm going to ask, would you prefer that we add the word and goal in there, or would you like to vote on it as written?
There's literally no difference. Like the goal and the goals are going to be a part of the strategic plan. Those are going to be brought to committee. We're not making any of those decisions. It's ultimately going to be the committee that talks about those goals and sets those goals. There's literally no point in changing any words. If you really feel that you'd like to, it doesn't really matter, but I think we
Okay.
should just move on with it.
So what needs to happen is you've moved the previous question. We've cut off any further debate. Those in favor of the previous question will rise. And then you will sit down, and then those opposed will rise, and then you will sit down. If 2/3 are in the affirmative, then the previous question will be ordered. So it's now a 2/3 vote for this to be approved. If you want to continue debate and discussion and add the amendments, then you will stay seated.
Can we raise our hands or is that not?
Yeah, let's just raise our
You
hand.
can raise your hand or rise, it doesn't matter. You're actually all supposed to be rising when you speak, so.
That room, I think knows.
So, all right, so you have moved the previous question as written. Those in favor of the question, can you raise your hands? Those opposed? Director O'Hara opposed. So,
Sarah?
She
Sarah,
was
you
in favor.
were in favor?
I was in favor, yeah.
So the motion as written has been approved. However, that does not preclude us from when the president, the vice president internal, and the director of student development present their procedure for creating the long-term strategic plan, if they do not include a process for consulting on goals, at that point, we can direct them to do so.
I have a point of order. So I think
Absolutely.
you have to vote on calling the question, and that's what the 2/3 majority
And now we
is.
have to actually vote on the motion.
No, I don't think so.
Really? Okay,
I think,
all right.
as far as I know,
Wrong.
yes, so you've. Okay, it is moved and seconded to order the previous question. Ordering the previous question will cut off any further debate. Those in favor of the previous question rise, so it simply becomes a 2/3 majority vote. Yep,
That's kind of handy.
oh, I'm supposed to stand up too. Oh, well.
If you ask for a podium, forget it. No gavel.
All right. I might need a gavel the way we're getting into debates here. Moving on to item 13.7. I really hope we don't have any more contentious issues. No, this is good. I really invite this. I mean, the fact that we haven't included it in the motion, despite that, it will mean, I hope, that the people who are drafting the procedure will take that into account. So moving on, item 13.7, the motion to invite CUSA Council as a joint competent chamber on finance policies. The motion is as written, whereas many financial reporting, auditing, and budgeting processes involve both the board and membership of the corporation. Excuse me, be it resolved that the CUSA board invite CUSA Council to be an additional competent chamber on the finance policy and the finance approvals policy. Those are included in the 2 appendices. That is moved by myself. We're going to need a new seconder now. Do we have a seconder for the motion? Director Charles. So what this motion is, this was a motion recommended by staff that the finance policy and the finance approvals policy both include tasks for council. Is that correct, Sam?
Yes.
And so by adding them as a joint competent chamber, it would mean that it's bicameral. Any amendments that are made by one chamber would have to be adopted by the other as well, correct?
Mhm.
And this would allow them to, rather than the board just simply dictating what council's job is, it will allow council to have a role in what their role is.
Yes, exactly.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
So is there any debate on this question? All right. Seeing none.
Can I just have some clarity? So what exactly would be council's role in these policies?
So
So
there,
you're saying they'll have additional responsibilities?
If I may speak, yeah.
go ahead.
It doesn't give them any additional responsibilities really that are already outlined to them in the act. What these do is really frame when those responsibilities take place.
So for example, like the executive budget, like those things.
Yes, yeah, delineating the 2 budgets. There's on when things have to be reported and when our fiscal year, it's those types of things.
But what happens then if there's a deadline? In the unlikely possibility.
I'll do my best to answer this question. So these policies are approved and in effect right now. They were approved by the trustee board. If council can choose to adopt them without amendment, and at that point they would become bicameral. If they do not adopt them, if they make amendments and then adopt them with the amendments, you folks do not have to accept the amendments. So this is fully an invitation on your end to allow them to come into this process. They may make amendments that you actually like, and in that case, I hope that then becomes bicameral. But for now, this is at the moment, it's a policy entirely that the board only is accountable to. And there are probably some things in there that you want council accountable to. You want them accountable to certain deadlines, and you want them to know their responsibilities And as much as the act is there, counselors aren't reading the act on a regular basis. And so that's the reason that it would be bicameral. These are the two that are already on the books and in existence. I would actually make a recommendation that down the line, you do one that is very specific on how you approve a budget and what aspects of the budget and what happens if a budget deadlocks. I know we're waiting for our new finance and administration person to start. We want them involved in that process, but that's the level we're going down, is to get some of these procedures to get buy-in from both entities. But yes, ultimately, if there is a deadlock, if council will not pass a version that is amenable to this board, then the authority stays with the board where it's already in effect, already been passed.
And if there were a deadlock in the future, let's say 10, 15 years down the road, the existing policy would stand until both chambers adopt it. So if council made some crazy changes and the board actually simply didn't want to adopt them, the board simply wouldn't adopt them, or vice versa. If the board made some silly changes that council didn't want to adopt, council wouldn't adopt them. And then the policy would remain exactly as written. And we would follow it to the letter of the current policy. So because we have existing policies, deadlocks would be less concerning. Obviously, you could possibly get into a real tussle, and you could potentially have an issue where neither chamber wants to work with the other. I hope we never get to a point where that happens. Dustin?
Do either of these policies or this motion provide for either entity to block initiatives, spending, whatnot, that may frankly be out of their purview?
I'll answer. Outside of their purview, no. Does it allow them to block spending within their purview? Yes.
So they could essentially go and they could say, oh, well, we're the council and we don't want to be the approving authority for the executive budget. They could essentially remove themselves from it if the board approved. But it's highly unlikely they'd be able to remove someone else's authority because it's bicameral. You know, I mean, if the board were to go in and try and cut council out, council would be able to say, well, hold on a second. You can't do anything because we haven't cut the policy yet. So I think, does that sort of answer your question, Justin? Or?
Sort of. I mean, I'm just worried about certain, perhaps the long-term strategic goals that, sort of out there that,
I don't.
I wonder, my concern is that you end up with an organization that is not actually able to do anything.
Anastasia?
Yeah, sorry, I'm concerned too. I was just echoing this one.
I don't believe, and Sam, you're a little more expert on these policies than I am, but I don't believe that there's anything in here that would cause.
I mean, I don't think there's anything in here for concern either, but to be frank, if we need to have more time to have meetings about this before the next board meeting, I'm happy to table that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would love to put it to the finance and governance subcommittee, maybe.
If that's what we would like, absolutely. Motion to table, I think we have to table this motion first and then refer the matter. So do we have a motion to table from the president? Do we have a seconder?
Sarah.
Sarah. So we've got a motion to table this motion, moved by President Lettieri, seconded by Director Zaitlin. Is there any discussion? There might not be any discussion allowed on that, but seeing none, all those in favor? All right, so we have tabled the current motion.
And I also move to refer to the finance and governance subcommittee.
And Director Fitzgerald has seconded. All those in favor of referring this matter to the Finance and Governance Subcommittee? That is unanimous as well. Wonderful. So. Item 13.8. This is the motion to refer the hybrid work policy to the Human Resources Subcommittee of the CUSA Board. Whereas the COVID-19 pandemic has upended traditional work settings, and whereas the hybrid work policy requires updating to reflect these changes, be it resolved that the hybrid work policy be referred to the Human Resources Subcommittee.
Could I just leave on this for a second?
I have to first say that it's moved by you, and I need a seconder before discussion. Director. President Lettieri.
Okay, I was just gonna say, I like this policy, we're just setting it to the subcommittee, so for some edits and review, because I think it was, maybe Sam can touch on this a little more, actually, it went through
How,
the trustee board, but it kind of,
yes, it was approved by the previous trustee board without
Without
a
review.
minutized meeting.
yeah.
So, yeah, we don't really know how it came into effect and it merits review.
So it simply needs to be
It needs-
reviewed and
yeah.
updated.
Yeah.
Perfect. Is it enacted? Do we know if it's enacted? Would we?
It
Technically, yes.
is, it is.
Okay. So this is just us going over it. Is there any discussion on that? We're just essentially referring to it. Seeing no.
If people are curious, there are issues with policy with respect to it wasn't degenderized beforehand. There's some typos in it that weren't identified during the approval process.
It's like key and stuff?
Yeah.
Oh my god,
Like,
how old is it?
it was based on a template that the former director of HR had used. So that's the cleanup that needs to happen. The substance of the actual policy would remain the same. Substantially.
If there's no further discussion, I will call the question. All those in favor of referring this to the Human Resources Subcommittee, raise your hands. That is unanimous. Item 13.8 is passed. Item 13.9, motion to refer the operating and capital budget approval policy and procedure to the Finance and Government Subcommittee of the CUSA Board. Whereas a draft of the operating and capital budget approval policy and procedure is prepared, and do we have that linked? Be it resolved that the operating and capital budget approval policy and procedure be referred to the Finance and Government Subcommittee of the CUSA Board. So this is, I believe, do we have a copy of that somewhere?
There is a draft. This is actually when I was mentioning this, but we'll spell out specific dates. But it was drafted by the former director of finance before they left CUSA, and so it was it's not in effect. It's strictly a draft. So yeah, not even worthy of being linked, I don't think, but worthy of the Finance and Government Subcommittee.
Yeah. This is moved by President Soikos Lettieri. Do we have a seconder? Is there any further discussion on this? Yeah, so essentially just referring it to you guys, and we'll see what you come up with. Perfect. I will call the question if there's no further discussion. All those in favor of the motion to refer the operating and capital budget approval policy and procedure to the Finance and Government Subcommittee of the Board, you can raise your hands. That is unanimous. All right. 13.10. Motion to refer the draft compensation policy to the Board Subcommittee on Finance and Governance. So this was mentioned, I believe, in your committee report, Johannes, that there was some discussion on some sort of compensation, be it monetary or non-monetary for counselors. So whereas many past CUSA counselors have noted the time commitment and job responsibilities of their elected office, and whereas the council is 1/3 vacant due to lack of engagement during the election, leading to overlapping in councillor duties due to undermanning, and whereas monetary compensation is a common method to incentivize otherwise voluntary positions, and whereas the compensation bylaw of the old associations bylaw necessitated modernization and review, which is also included in this draft policy, and whereas the compensation policy was approved by the Constitution and Policy Review Committee and was to be sent to council for approval. Furthermore, under the new corporate corporate governance structure of the association, it would be desirable for such legislation to originate from the board to avoid perceptions of self-enrichment by council. Therefore, be it resolved that this agenda subcommittee refer the draft policy approved by the CPRC with some amendments drafted by the Vice President internal following recommendations from past executive to the board finance and governance subcommittee for further amendments and presentation to the full board. That's moved by myself. Do we have a seconder?
I have a
So
question.
we need a seconder before we can discuss the motion.
But didn't we
But I have-
amend the motion before the
I
second?
actually just have like a really high level question on whether or not this motion should even exist. I just need to know.
Okay.
Yesterday, when we were in our call with David, did he not say that he like really wants us not to get involved with the council compensation? Did he say that?
No,
No, he's
Specifically about us.
Yeah, we
we cannot be compensated by law.
No,
No, but did he say something specific about, I feel like.
he said something to the
specific.
effect of not, the group, basically what this motion says, a group should not make a financial decision for themselves.
Yeah.
So that's why that part is in there.
That's why it would originate here rather than the council.
yes. That's why-
Okay, just clarifying. And I'll second it.
You will second it. And I should point out that, so I was on the committee, the CPRC last year when we drafted this. And I'll admit that I was one of the proponents of this committee. Perhaps because I was feeling a little bit overworked, sitting on 3 different committees. Nobody or very few other councillors who even were sitting on committees, even though it's a requirement under bylaw that they were all sitting on committees by December, many of them weren't. Many people simply didn't show up or didn't interact with council meetings. And one of the solutions that we came up with to promote some engagement, especially during some of those 3-4 hour meetings, was perhaps we should review or investigate the idea of compensating councillors. So the CPRC went through that. We discussed with former VPF Vanessa Baptiste, and it never went anywhere because we didn't want to rush. This is something we don't want to rush into because it would be a fairly significant financial decision and something we wouldn't want to go back on. It's something that we would like to investigate though. So I think the idea here, referring it now to the Finance and Governance Subcommittee, because that really is within their purview, to look at something like this and see whether it's a good idea or whether there are other ways, non-monetary ways, to compensate and incentivize councillors for their participation, because we saw it last year and we're seeing it especially this year. There's a lack of participation on CUSA Council. Is it because people feel like they're not getting anything out of it? Perhaps, and maybe this is a way to incentivize that. So.
Sorry, no, yeah.
I was just gonna
Sorry.
say, in terms of incentives, could CCR credits be considered, or is that something that's not even?
Believe.
They
it
are
could
Not
be.
valuable enough. right?
I was just about to say that, I don't really.
But-
they offer
Because we could say like, you have to sit in this X amount of meetings, or you need to do this in order to gain your credits.
Then we're just gonna have a lot of people resigning if they.
Okay.
I think this is discussion that would fall under the, like, when we're
Yeah.
reviewing this policy.
For the Finance and Governance Subcommittee. That's
For the purposes of the official record, does it make sense to change the secondary was leading to overlapping counselor duties? I don't think there's any purpose to due to undermining.
I was a bit, I didn't see that in the motion before, and I don't see it having,
I would just take the 3 words out.
we're gonna actually have to, because it's been seconded, that has to become an amendment.
Okay, wait.
That's what I was getting at
seconded it.
before.
Yeah.
Amending before you
I
second.
did it, I did the second.
Sorry.
Yeah.
No
Have
problem.
you not seconded it yet?
No.
Yeah, we've discussed it. I can,
He gave me feeling
I will-
like he's in a pickle.
I'm going to pull, this is maybe not totally kosher, but do we unanimously consent to the removal of those 3 words?
Yes.
Yes? There we go.
Davin would not like that one.
No, it was Davin who wrote the motion, and I probably should have read it a little more carefully. I read it quickly and went, yeah, seems good. Anyway,
Yeah, so good.
yeah, again, it's just a motion to refer. And we'll see what the Finance and Governance Subcommittee comes up with. Again, whether they think it's even a good idea, I don't know. Yeah, looking forward to your input. Is there any more discussion on the matter? Hearing none, all those in favor, if you can raise your hands. That is unanimous. We will refer the draft compensation policy to the Finance and Governance Subcommittee. Item, oh,
Sorry.
go ahead.
No, nothing. I was just gonna say, like, in terms of councilor compensation, I also don't know how great it looks to, like, instead of immediately trying, like, yeah, this is all stuff that'll be discussed in the subcommittee.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's,
yeah,
yeah.
100%.
You're all
It's just
welcome to
a
join
sentiment.
us right away if you have ideas, suggestions, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah, and the idea is to whatever, like likely they might even come back to the board it might come back to the board and then the board will have a chance to discuss it and then maybe it'll get sent back to the committee for some more review.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is something, it's something that, you know, again, didn't get passed last year because we didn't want to rush into it. It's something we actually took several months writing. And we didn't have enough time to get it passed. And it's something that perhaps might not even be something we want to pass this year. It may be something we want to leave for the next board to pass, to get a number of different eyes on it. And it's something that probably wouldn't come into effect, even if we did pass it this year, it wouldn't come into effect this year, it would come into effect at the next council election. Again, giving that as much space as possible to make sure that we're not perceived to be disproportionately compensating people that we may or may not know, or current councilors. So, item 1311, the motion to direct the Vice President internal to draft a mandate letter for the Executive Composition Committee of the CUSA Board. So whereas following the major democratic and corporate changes which occurred following the recommendations of the Democratic Reform Committee and the corporate merger which occurred in May 2022, and whereas other student associations similar in kind to CUSA I'm going to change the grammar here, have different executive compositions. Excuse me. And whereas council and the board needs to strike an ad hoc committee to review the composition of the executive and the terms of reference for their positions. And whereas executive composition is a jurisdiction shared by both board and council. And whereas council adopted motion C17, motion to reaffirm CUSA's commitment to examining executive compensation and general compensation, which indicates council's desire to review executive composition. Be it resolved that the board direct the Vice President internal to draft a mandate letter for the joint ad hoc executive compensation committee to present to board and council at the respective chambers regular August meeting. Moved by President Stoikos Laturi and seconded by myself, Chair Sims. So this motion, essentially, one of the things that came about, the vice president positions are now part-time. There were various things. I know one of the first things that former Vice President Internal and Acting President Ashimi mentioned in our first meeting was that one of the things the previous executive wanted the board to look at was a review of executive composition and potentially compensation as well. I see I've got, yes.
Well, it also mentions the terms of references here, which is something that we've already
Yeah.
talked about as a board.
This should read, that's a typo. That is a typo, that should read composition, not compensation. And I'm calling it a typo because I think that way.
And we don't
Have to amend. So essentially, this is directing Gavin to come up with a mandate letter. He'll present it to board and council by August. Board and council can either accept it or reject it, and we can go from there. But this is sort of another one of those, as Sarah mentioned earlier, this way the volunteers don't have to write it. This way we're directing somebody who's paid to do it, to do the work, and then we can just make sure it's done properly. Yeah, a lot of and whereases, but I think at the end of the day, a reasonably simple motion.
You can tell which one's Davin writes, he makes them very detailed.
What do you mean? I wrote this one.
Oh, you wrote this one? Well, because you said this one, Davin wrote, so anyways,
No,
yeah,
we're telling Gavin to write this. Gavin has no idea we've written this.
Oh, I see.
Gavin, no, Gavin's
No,
gonna.
I mean,
Get some
the,
work.
the item previous to this one, you said.
Oh, that one, Gavin. wrote,
Yeah,
yes.
so it's similar format, and then all the rest are like pretty short, that's okay. No, it's good, it's a reflection of, good policy. practice.
Sometimes you need many and whereases, sometimes you don't.
It's grammar, that's good example.
What?
It's grammar.
If there is.
It's the truth.
If there is no further discussion on the motion, and seeing none, we can move into voting procedure. All those in favor of the motion, if you can raise your hands. That is unanimous. Wonderful. So I guess Sam or Anastasia, you can tell Davin that he's supposed to be doing this.
I bet he'll watch.
Oh, he probably will be watching. So Davin, if you're watching the recording, you have to do this. Moving
I'm
on.
putting it on Monday.com tonight.
Moving on to item 13.12. The motion to direct the Human Resources Committee to draft a written policy on disconnecting from work. Whereas the Ontario provincial government has passed Bill 27, the Working for Workers Act 2021, an amendment to the Employment Standards Act 2000, which requires employers to have a written policy on disconnecting from work in place for all employees. Be it resolved that the board direct the Human Resources Committee to draft a written policy on disconnecting from work for approval at the regularly scheduled August 2022 board meeting. That's moved by President Stoikos-Latiri and seconded by me.
Just for clarification, just for me, when you say disconnecting from work, do you mean after work hours?
Yeah.
Not being able to contact the employee? Okay.
So essentially, like, this is basically to get us in compliance with like the law now.
Okay.
And just, it's a disconnecting from work, basically, that employees don't have to respond to you after hours and things like that. But obviously it will be assessed by, hopefully the finance and administration director and the, finance, on the human resources committee.
Yeah, so it's just to bring us into compliance so that we have a policy.
It's all of the requirements are detailed in online, you can find them.
It's also a bit more complicated with a policy for an organization like ours, given that we also have collective agreement that we have to respect, as well as we have businesses
That operate after.
that operate different office hours than, say,
Yeah.
the general CUSA office would. So
But that
it
would
does
be
need to be
reflected.
a nuanced policy.
So, but yeah, it's just directing them to write one. And then we'll hopefully, well, by August 22. This also, in a way, makes sure that if anything were to happen between now and August, we would be able to say, well, we are in the process of creating one.
There was a 6-month timeline when the legislation came into effect
Oh,
Okay.
perfect.
for organizations to adopt.
So I think August 2022 falls within that time.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
We haven't voted on that yet. Is there any discussion on the motion as presented? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion, you can raise your hands. There we go. That is unanimous. 13, I'm on page 19 of 25 of the agenda. We are moving through. So item 13.13, motion to sign on to the 50-30 challenge. Whereas CUSA is committed to upholding the principles of equity, diversity, and inclusivity in the workplace. And whereas the Government of Canada is providing additional resources to those organizations committed to the 50-30 challenge. And whereas these additional resources can be used to develop CUSA's equity, diversity, and inclusivity initiatives in the workplace. And whereas other organizations on campus have already signed on to the 50-30 challenge. And be it resolved that the board directs the president CEO to sign CUSA onto the 50-30 challenge. This is moved by President Stoikos-Latiri, and we need a new seconder. Director,
Yeah, it says other organizations on campus, but it's actually like Carlton has already signed on to the 50/30 challenge.
Well, you should have told me that when I was
I
writing.
did.
No, you didn't.
I just didn't see, I didn't notice it.
Um,
That's a typo.
well, Carleton's an organization on campus, so we'll leave it at
No,
that.
it's like, it is campus.
For
It is
the point
campus.
of the recording, and for the record, should you briefly iterate what the 50/30 challenge is?
Sure.
I was gonna
I
ask that
will-
question.
I will direct it to Anastasia because she knows rather more about it than I do.
Okay, I'm opening it up. I wrote this, so. Okay, so, okay, yeah, I first learned about this 50/30 challenge on the Board of Governors because Carleton is one of the institutions that signed on to it. And sort of at CUSA, our offices, service centers, and businesses generally already reached this goal. Signing on to it as an organization would provide us with useful resources to further develop and improve our EDI initiatives. Some of the business managers that I've spoken to actually mentioned that they noticed this as one of my policy points in during the campaign, and they're really excited to sign on. Which was really great to hear. And just to know, it's like it doesn't require us, it doesn't have any authority over us if we don't actually hit that goal. I think that's something that Gray had brought up. But yeah, so I'll just read like a background statement on it. It says the government of Canada is investing into the 50/30 challenge to develop tools and resources and offer incentives to support participating organizations, including definitions and standards that are more widely agreed upon, will enable diverse initiatives as well as governments to foster concrete transformational changes that will celebrate Canadian diversity and make it more inclusive. Based on a competitive request for proposals, the Diversity Institute was selected by the Standards Council of Canada and Ministry of Innovation, Science and Economic Development to develop a publicly available specification through public consultations to provide guidance for organizations participating in the 50/30 challenge. So it's like guidance.
So what's the 50 and 30? What's there?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. 50 is like women and non-binary people, and 30 is people of color or marginalized communities.
Yeah, so essentially, yeah, it sounds like from what I gathered from Anastasia that it doesn't actually require us to do anything, but that it's a goal that we're aspiring to, and it sounds like it's actually a goal that we've for the most part already met.
Or exactly meets it.
So actually specifically, I'll say it's 50% women and non-binary people, and 30% other underrepresented or equity-seeking groups is specifically what they refer to.
So yeah, I mean, so it's a goal that we're committing to, and by committing to the goal, we have access to all of these additional resources that we can use to improve our EDI.
And they actually have specific resources, and I was like watching the videos, and I have some links that if you want, I can share with you later. Like they're like our videos, so we can't play them here, but like essentially they have different resources for what type of organization you are. So like they have specific resources for like a non-for-profit. Like they specify that.
I mean, any way that we can access resources to help us improve ourselves that doesn't cost us a lot of time and money is, I think, absolutely something that I
Yeah,
support.
and it's also just like puts us on like the right step towards, like this would be one of our long-term plans.
Sam, have you spoken on this yet? Do you have any comment on it?
You want my comment on this?
Yeah.
Why?
Well, because I think like it has to do with developing the workplace and I think this makes our workplace more productive. I think it's a
Yeah, I mean,
stronger workplace.
yeah, okay, if you want me to speak, I'm always happy to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that the more marginalized and minoritized voices you have included in decision making, the better the decisions and the more likely they are to stand the test of time. Largely, if Dave wants me to go full-blown student development, it's because some of the people that have those experiences that have been minoritized in some way, they tend to have things that make them more persistent, resilient, better employees over the long term. I'm talking about things like the availability of a strong support network, experience navigating the discriminatory system, a positive self-concept balanced with a realistic self-appraisal, as also usually having a non-traditional learning experience, something outside the classroom that's usually been necessary. There are other things as well, like concrete leadership experience that CUSA frankly could cultivate to make sure that those individuals are even stronger, both when they're working for us and when one day they're a CUSA alumni and hopefully want to give something back. Is that what you're looking for?
Yep.
Yeah.
So I might also, it might help to understand as well that it's not they're not cumulative goals, they're actually independent goals. The 50% is a goal unto itself, the 30% is a goal unto itself. They're not, there's not a trade-off, for lack of a better word, or a cumulative effect. You're not looking at, oh, this has to accumulate for 80% of your work. No, I think that's an important distinction in terms of implementation and signing up for it and understanding what you're signing up for as well.
Well, it's fantastic that we already.
So basically, the goal is to have 50% of the workplace of CUSA, of the workforce of CUSA, being women and non-binary, and 30% be minorities.
Mhm.
Okay.
As well as.
Yeah, as well
right.
as.
So like one individual could fulfill more than
Both,
one.
yeah, one individual can
Right.
fulfill both the 50 and 30.
Yeah, so think of the goals as independent. though.
Mm-hmm.
They're not trade-offs.
There could be a male with
Yeah,
five, for
it is,
example.
yeah.
Right.
If there's any further discussion,
I think this is great.
Yeah.
Looking forward.
yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what they can do for us. With that, I will call the question. All those in favor of the motion to sign up the 50/30 challenge, raise your hands. That appears to be unanimous. All right, so we have directed you to do something, Anastasia. Motion or item 13.14. Motion to appoint the QP 1281 collective agreement bargaining team. Whereas CUSA has several unionized positions under QP 1281, and whereas CUSA is likely to enter into negotiations bargaining with the union, and whereas the executive director, president, CEO, director of finance, and director of human resources would typically sit on this team, and whereas CUSA is currently in the process of hiring a director of human resources, be it resolved that the bargaining team consists of the executive director, president, CEO, director of finance, director of communications and strategy. We can amend this now to include the director of finance and administration, correct?
Well, we can take up the last whereas,
Or,
first of all, because we're not hiring a director of human resources.
right,
Yeah.
because he has accepted then, hasn't he?
Yes, yes.
Fabulous. I don't know if I knew that.
Starts July 18th.
And then this would also be removed because we can just go ahead and remove the director of
Yes.
communications and strategy.
Yeah, director of communications and strategy does not need to be there. Director of finance.
And administration.
Administration. We don't need to have this because they are all now sitting on the team. That long motion suddenly became very short.
Yes.
That's fabulous. Excuse me. So I'm,
Could I just also say one more thing? I was looking back through old bargaining teams and I noticed that it was also had the vice president of finance on the part-time on the key, like the key.
Yeah, I'm sorry, before we move forward.
sure anything we can do without
as
having
the-
it officially.
you know,
announced is good.
Going through the process with the 3011, understanding what the differences are for specifically the 1281. I think this particular team would benefit from more student representation.
And I did notice that actually it includes the VPF on old teams as well. So I was just wondering if we're making this amendment, can we just also include the VPF as a fourth bargaining team member?
Do we have some unanimous consent there? I mean, obviously we can actually amend it if we like, but is everyone in agreement with that?
I think it would add for I think a better dynamic with respect to that conversation.
Sure. No, I quite agree. Perfect, so I will now read the motion, and then it will become official. So we have the motion to appoint QP 1281 collective agreement bargaining team. Whereas CUSA has several unionized positions under QP 1281, and whereas CUSA is likely to enter into negotiations and bargaining with the union, be it resolved that the bargaining team consists of the executive director, the president and CEO, the director of finance and administration, and the vice president, finance, secretary, treasurer. This motion is moved by President Stoikos Lettieri and seconded by Chair Sims. Do we have any debate on the issue?
Sorry, can you just put a hyphen between secretary and
You want a hyphen, you want a
treasurer?
hyphen between
Yeah.
vice president too there?
No, it's usually with a hyphen.
Usually without the hyphen?
Now, with bargaining with the union, are subcommittees able to sit in with that, or is it exclusively just the people now?
No, now in the actual bargaining sessions, it would be,
Hello.
hey.
Hello.
And it would be limited to the team identified, yeah.
We can share. Put it on the chair, my bad.
Yeah.
That's a bad chair.
How was your exam?
Let the record know that Simon,
You're just
Director
studying.
Harris has entered.
I'm still seeing 3 hours behind on my laptop at 3:45. So we were just, to bring you up to speed, Simon, we were just on 13.14.
Wait, sorry, before I forget, I wanted to also mention, to answer Catherine's question, that like we meet very frequently, and it takes a lot of time, like hours and hours and hours.
Okay.
So, not sure if it would be impossible to accommodate the director's schedules on our list.
To participate in this,
Seems like a lot to ask.
Yeah.
it would be a big ask for the director to
Yeah.
participate in that. I mean, if somebody wants to, I mean, that's okay, but understand, generally happens during business hours.
Yeah.
Typical office, so 9, the meetings do take place between 9 and 5. They often go for 3 to 4 hours in length.
And there's like 6
Yeah.
plus.
I mean, don't get me wrong, I don't suspect this particular agreement to be as lengthy as the 3011. But that said, I'm certainly not aware yet of what their particular issues are going into it.
And we'll be sure to provide updates while we're in it. to the
Oh,
board.
yeah.
Yeah, so just to recap for Director Harris. So we're just moving into voting procedure unless you have any comments on this.
Not at the moment. I mean, I guess I was about to ask about kind of the director thing, but it's been covered, so.
Yeah, we.
This is- This
Did
is,
we have to vote on that amendment?
No, we did it before I read the motion,
Okay.
so it wasn't on the
Okay.
floor yet.
Okay.
Simply because the motion was now completely incorrect,
Yeah,
so.
no, sounds good.
So we have the motion to appoint the QP 1281 collective agreement bargaining team. Whereas CUSA has several unionized positions under QP 1281, and whereas CUSA is likely to enter into negotiations and bargaining with the union, be it resolved that the bargaining team consists of the executive director, the president and CEO, the director of finance and administration, and the vice president, finance, secretary, and treasurer. Moved by President Stoikos Lettieri and seconded by myself. Is there any further discussion on the issue? Nope, seeing none. All those in favor, if you can raise your hands. That is unanimous on the console.
You're welcome.
All right, so this is now to actually make it possible. This is the administrative part of hiring the finance and administration director. So we have the motion to merge the director of finance and the director of human resources into a new position of director of finances and administration, and to create the new position of human resource administrator. Do we have a salary determined, Dustin?
The initial planned salary would be equivalent to entry level positions with 3011. However, that specific number has not been identified or agreed on yet.
Why don't you just say equivalent to?
Yes,
the collective?
it'll be determined by the collective agreement that we're working on with 3011.
I'll suggest,
Two other entry level positions.
Yeah.
As
As determined
determined by the collective agreement.
So, you get-
Harmonize.
That was like music. almost.
What can I say? We're connected.
31.
81?
No, 31.
31.
Well, this is a full-time position.
Unless you want, like,
Do you
training.
want
Unless you want to make a 20-hour week.
I wasn't entirely sure.
Sorry, I just noticed that we didn't really clarify the human resources administrator. Oh, there it is, I see. No, but human resources, oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, human resources administrator will also be full-time.
Not necessarily.
But they.
Any salary would be prorated. So if they would,
Yeah, but this is saying that this is saying that
It
it's
doesn't say
full-time
full-time.
because it says
they're covered.
30/11.
Right,
So,
But
or,
I know, but-
but do you want to just clarify or 1281?
well, no, it won't be 1281. Don't forget, there is an element to the collective agreement that we've agreed to that allows for part-time positions within 3011.
Oh, okay,
That was in addition.
yes, yes.
I tried not to allow them to do that, but they did.
Would we prefer to simply not state anything about which union it would be under and just say?
Well, it wouldn't be a student, 1281 is isolated for the student,
Oh, okay.
whereas QP 3011 is isolated for non-students.
So it would be 3011 no matter what.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, so just
So
leave
it's
it at that,
fine.
that's perfect.
I will now read the motion, now that we've amended that. The motion to merge the Director of Finance and Director of Human Resources into a new position of Director of Finance, correct? Finance and Administration, and to create the new position of Human Resources Administrator. Whereas CUSA has had the opportunity to streamline the Finance and Administration Department by merging the Director of Finance position and Director of Human Resources position entitled
The director.
into a new position. A new position entitled the Director of Finance and Administration. Be it resolved that the Director of Human Resources and the Director of Finance positions be suspended. Be it further resolved that the Director of Finance position and the Director of Human Resources position be merged, that they will be merged into a new position entitled the Director of Finance and Administration. Be it further resolved that the new position of HR Administrator be created at a salary equivalent to other entry-level positions as determined by the collective bargaining agreement with CUSA 3011. And be it further resolved that the terms of reference for these positions be drafted by the Executive Director and presented to the Board at the regular August meeting. That's moved by myself, Chair Sims, and seconded by President Soto Terry. Is there any discussion on the motion? Dustin, are you comfortable writing
Yeah.
terms of reference? Good.
Yeah, we're in the process of
And
doing it right now
this
for
is
the
like
contract. so.
pretty just like, formal, but we already kind of agreed to it informally.
I think this is a great idea.
Yeah.
It's great. I
Dustin
mean,
made it really call it this way.
yeah. It's,
Thanks, buddy.
well, but this was by virtue of the candidate we got, wasn't it?
Well, that's what sparked the idea, for sure.
Which is fabulous. I mean, we're saving money and giving somebody else,
Yeah, I would
somebody else
say
an entry level
as
job.
long as we just like keep in mind the urgency of the director of, the HR administrator as well. It's a great idea.
Yes, 100%. We've actually already asked the incoming to review terms of reference for that job.
Awesome.
And he starts
July 18th.
July 18th, so 2.5 3 weeks. Perfect. Is there any other discussion on the motion? Hearing none, we can move into voting procedure. I'm not going to read the motion again. But all those in favor of the motion to merge the Director of Finance and Director of Human Resources into a new position of Director in Finance and Administration and create the new position of Human Resources Administrator, please raise your hands. That is unanimous. All right, motion passes unanimously. Item 1316, the motion to direct the Vice President Internal and Executive Director to draft CUSA key holder policy. Whereas the security of CUSA's offices is a priority of the Board of Directors under Section 9.4 of the CUSA bylaws. And whereas keys to the CUSA office, including master sets, should have clearly defined protocol to ensure the safety of CUSA staff, students, and any confidential information. Be it resolved that the Vice President Internal and Executive Director draft a CUSA key holder policy for fall 2022, outlining designated key holders, key assignments, and returning processes, as well as protocol in the event that keys are lost. Just gonna pull that comma out of there. This is moved by President Stoikos Laturi and seconded by Vice Chair Harris. Do we have any discussion on the motion? Looks like Dustin.
Only, I don't know if it's an appropriate addition, but I guess that would be, we don't have to, but I'm just wondering if we should formally state with consultation with the building operations management team
Okay, of Carlton.
of our, like,
Oh, is that our
Yeah.
CUSA?
the current
Yeah, I think like that's like what you would do, like it would just fall under
Okay.
your contribution, because that means like Henry would have to sit down there and work on the policy,
Alright.
right? So
as
just
long-
like
yeah,
under your own, that's why we included you, under your own, responsibility to help draft this policy, you just take the.
I'll
initiative-
delegate
initiative
as I see
to-
fit.
Yes, to consult as needed.
When it says master sets, does that mean like a complete set of all the keys, or
Yeah.
does that mean the master key?
The,
Both.
yeah,
Okay, I don't think necessarily we have control over the master key specifically. I think FMP is the one who has control over the master key, like,
We
No,
do,
but
but no,
that's-
this would set a
that's-
policy that people just can't ask for.
yeah.
There have been executives who come through the doors in the past that have just demanded keys.
And then, yeah, and also it's like the master sets, like the big chunky ones with all the keys that some of our staff have,
Yeah,
is what we were specifically
like,
referring to.
yeah, so.
That's what I don't
Henry
actually know
James
about the
keys
master
will
key.
be written in policy.
Yeah. We didn't even include the master key in this actually, so if that's something you wanna add, then you can add it.
I would
no,
assume
no,
master
we
sets
shouldn't, we
should-
shouldn't have it because we don't have control.
Yeah, no, that's why we didn't add it, that's literally only says master sets, but if you want, I'm saying in the policy, you wanna clarify that the master key is under FMP.
Yeah,
Et cetera, we can ask for it,
That's
that's,
fine.
that's
Of
good.
a vote. Can you come back and do something?
This is good though, because, yeah, I think FMP will appreciate this, yeah.
yeah.
If you, yeah.
No, it never
You
came
can
up.
also just-
There was a spare sandwich.
Yeah.
Where was it?
Yeah, they brought it
Back
back.
then, I thought it was stuff.
I didn't see it.
It's probably.
Just go ask, just go ask.
All on the recording.
What?
All on the recording.
How is it on the recording?
We're recording everything?
Yeah, but my, I see where you need the motion. There's, okay, back to the topic.
Okay, I don't even know what
Question.
happened.
Question was answered, so a question was asked by Gabe about the master key, but the master key falls under the responsibility of the FMP, so Dustin will keep that in mind when
Yeah.
drafting the policy, but this specifically speaks to the master key sets, not the master key.
Okay,
So, but if he feels that's necessary in the policy, then you and VPI, the VPI have
Yeah, I mean,
authority to make that decision.
keys to the office would imply whichever keys
Yeah.
need to have clearly defined protocol.
I think, yeah,
And obviously, I don't think we need to add it, but obviously it will be presented to the board for adoption. I don't think we need to add that in fall 2022. Do we want to add a date or
no,
you don't like working the deadlines, Dustin?
no, I think fall 2022 is fair.
Perfect. Yeah, I mean, that sort of assumes it'll come up in October. Perfect. Unless there are any questions, just if the minutes can note that Director Matthews stepped out.
and.
Also
and
vice
Director
chair.
Mayor.
And Director, have we still got
Vice
quorum?
Chair.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We still have quorum. Oh, yeah, Sarah's up there. That's six of
People
us.
are stepping, I'm actually gonna step out for a minute also, let the record show, I'll be back in a
Do we
minute.
still have quorum? One-
Yeah, you still have quorum,
Yeah,
you still have
we do,
quorum.
we do.
I could also just take a recess for 3 minutes.
No, let's just keep going, we don't
No
have.
recess, power.
If I call the vote right now, you can vote and then leave, Sarah. I will call the vote on the question, moved by President Stoikos Laturi and seconded by Vice Chair Harris. All those in favor, if you can raise your hands. That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in favor.
We literally have one more left after this.
And do we? That's
Yes.
kind of- Thanks, Sarah. We still retain quorum. And just the Director Matthew and
Maybe
Director
2-1.
Harris, who actually, I was reading just the other day, will be deemed to assent to the motion unless they tell me within 5 days that they dissent to the motion. Interestingly enough.
That's for vice chair.
No, for anyone who was absent at the meeting,
Oh,
they are assumed to assent to the motion unless they say they dissent.
that is very strange, in my opinion.
Which is odd because they wouldn't be included in a majority vote for quorum, but whatever. Little oddities. It's not quite our last one, but
Well, it's like almost last.
it's the last one
It's the
tonight in
last
section
one,
13.
Yeah,
So item 13.7, the motion to fill the Joint Health and Safety Committee subcommittee. Whereas pursuant to section 4A of the Joint Health and Safety Committee policy, the board will strike a health and safety committee composed of equal worker and manager representation. Be it resolved that pursuant to section 4B of the policy, the board appoints 2 identified worker member volunteers. Will we be able to do this today?
No,
I'm
so
just asking
basically,
for the
this needs to be
practical.
tabled, this needs to
Okay.
be tabled until collective bargaining is done.
Okay, so I will have to read the motion through and then we'll have to move.
And so the other aspect of it, if we're gonna table it anyway, and that's, you don't necessarily need to discuss it now, but if QPA 3011, based on their responsibilities in the collective agreement, appoints 2 committee members,
Mhm.
for that committee, why is the board appointing the QP members to that
We would
committee?
be
I'm
sort of
not sure.
confirming, we would be like, confirming.
Why is, I don't actually remember seconding this motion either.
Yeah.
Well, we're just
Well,
tabling
okay,
it,
here's
so.
what happened, I asked a question about what's going on with this, and then Simon accidentally put it as a motion, I'm assuming. So let's just table this.
Okay.
And we can have further discussion when we get there, we can just remove
Yeah.
that, be it resolved once we get there. We just don't even have enough information as it stands to even consider this.
Yeah, I don't actually remember seconding it, so I didn't assent to seconding it, so I'm just gonna pull it off. We can actually just, nobody second it, nobody approve it, the motion,
Let's just
if
take it
nobody
off.
seconds it, the motion dies on the floor.
Yeah.
And then we can just. revisit
Yeah,
it
I mean,
independently.
the reality of it is that we have operational responsibilities.
Right,
Having the board fill this subcommittee doesn't actually make a lot of sense.
Well, no, but you'll have to fill the management, the 2 management positions. So we will have to table this. Sorry, before I will second it, but
Wait a
let's,
second, we have a mandate by collective agreement with the union
that they pick your management,
that we have to have a joint health and safety
but
committee.
there's two worker reps and 2 senior management staff reps. So
Yeah.
who picks the senior management off QP 3011, we would pick them.
Right.
So why
this
don't we,
shouldn't
what
read
if
volunteer
we?
worker members, this should read,
Yeah,
this should not be this.
no, it should be the senior staff.
I mean, personally, I would feel a lot better if the motion went away until
So,
we know what the terms of reference are from you.
so if no one seconds this, it will die on the floor and it will just cease to exist. Apart
This is
from
just
the
based
agenda.
from our own terms of reference as they
Right.
stand, but they're being amended maybe being amended at the collective bargaining, so let's just, let the motion die.
Darn, it died, okay. Yes.
All right, our first dead motion as a board. Congratulations, everyone.
Burn those bridges.
Our final motion, except for adjournment. Item 14.1. Notice a motion to refer the terms of reference to the Executive Composition Committee. So this is simply a notice of motion. Whereas schedules A through F of the bylaws consist of the terms of reference for the executive positions, and whereas they have not been updated since the major democratic and corporate reforms that occurred in May 2022, and whereas the Executive Composition Committee will have been struck by the time this motion is made, has been struck to investigate the changes to the executive, and whereas the changes to the bylaws and any schedules therein must be made by council, and whereas the vice president internal must be allocated enough time to draft a mandate letter for this new committee, be it resolved that the executive terms of reference schedules A, B, C, D, E, and F be referred to the Executive Composition Committee once it strikes. We don't actually need a notice of motion. We don't actually need to move this.
I believe it's once it is constituted.
Yeah. Once it is
remove-
constituted, but we don't actually, all this is just You don't need to vote on this.
It's just a notice that we'll be voting on it.
There we go. All we have to do is letting you know that not only are we gonna look for striking the executive composition committee, but that also at the same time that we'll be referring to the terms of reference, just to perhaps I know that there have been concerns about the terms of reference, as we all know, and this is just reaffirming that we are going to be looking into them. So, yeah, that is the notice of motion. And then, I'm just gonna run through our agenda to make sure. We do not have any unfinished business or deferred tabled items, I don't believe. We do not have any other business under item 16. Item 17, question and answer period. This is the time where if we were somewhere, there would be questions and answers. We can ask any questions of anyone. The staff can ask any questions of us. Dominique, if you have any questions for us, this would be the time for you to ask them. So do you have any questions?
Yeah, I actually do have a question. So for the board of directors, you guys said you're still looking for someone. I just want to know if that position has been vacant. Is that why you're looking for new members, or what's the reason here? Just so I can be clear.
Yeah, so we had a full board, and then one of our directors realized that their summer was too busy and they weren't able to dedicate enough time to the board. So as a result, they resigned effective May 31st, I believe that was the date on the letter. And so as a result of that, the board is now taking steps to fill that position. So the first step in that is filling the board nominating committee, and then the board nominating committee will take steps over the next few months to make sure that that position is filled. As we discussed, probably in the early fall or October, we may even have an emergency meeting to appoint a director, depending on how the timeline goes. We shall see. Yeah, so that's why that position is currently vacant at the moment. So if you want a section to refer to in the bylaws as to how the process is going, that is section, we're following the process under section 1.5A. A quorum of directors may, in consultation with the board nominating committee, fill a vacancy among the directors.
Oh, yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. That was perfect. And one last thing. Is it correct that you guys just tabled the motion, or did I not get that right?
It died.
We let the motion die. So it essentially ceases to exist because at the moment it's not relevant. So.
Okay, and that would be motion item 13.17, yes?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, thank you.
It's,
Yeah, item 17.
1317, yeah, it was drafted and then yeah, determined to not be relevant, something that we don't need to discuss at this time. So, yeah.
All right, so
Yeah, if you have no more questions, then thank you very much for joining us.
Yes, of course, thank you. No, I don't have any more questions. I think I'm good to go. Thanks for having me.
thanks, Dominique.
Thanks, Dominique.
Thank you. And with that, item 18, adjournment. Be it resolved that the board adjourns until 4 p.m. on Monday, the 15th of August at Haven, 43 Seneca. Well, some of you will. I will be at home.
When do you,
At Haven or Zoom.
Or Zoom, yeah.
Or virtual.
Or on Zoom, or virtual. And I think that we can do this by consensus.
Yeah,
So unless there are any opposed to adjournment, oh, we do have to vote on this. It does have to be moved. Do we have a mover to adjourn? Moved by President
and
Lettieri,
I saw,
seconded
Yeah.
by Director Fitzgerald. And Director Zaitman, everybody will move this one.
Wait, let's wait for Simon.
Oh my God, yeah.
Well, isn't he just like right down there, like it's the one motion that,
No, two
One motion.
No,
Oh, did he?
Director
Okay.
Huggins Charles seconded it already, by the way.
No, I was just gonna say you could vote.
Too bad.
Life's tough,
All right, fine.
And, all right,
so we have it moved, hold on, I guess I better. Actually, oh, there we go. We can do this by unanimous consent unless there are any opposed to adjournment. Seeing none opposed, this meeting is adjourned. Congratulations, everyone. And we will see you all for sure on the 15th of August. If not before, if we have something emergency,
Pressing.
some emergency.
Thank you.
Stop the recording.
Yep.
Yeah.